Chapter 31-36 31-36 The Elder's Shock. Chapter 31-36 31-36 The Elder's Shock. 31-36 The Elder's Shock. Ling Han tried to get closer for a closer look, but he discovered that when he was about 3 meters away from the ancient corpse, a terrifying killing intent immediately assaulted him. It could be clearly seen that the initially calm air had actually turned into multiple sharp blades, and the blades were all aimed at him. If Ling Han advanced one step further, he would be struck by the sharp blades, and be pierced into mush. A corpse that had been dead for who knew how long actually had such might? It could be imagined that when this ancient corpse was alive, it must have been a super elite. Perhaps it had advanced above Meridian opening tier and stood on an even higher peak on the mountain of martial arts. But now, he had turned into a corpse, lying in this dark world. Who knew how many years he had been dead for? How could a civilization disappear all of a sudden? Ling Han thought back to the lower realm of his past. That was because there was the control of the 5 sects of the immortal realm, turning the lower realm into a massive cauldron, using all living creatures as ingredients to concoct a great alchemical pill. Was it the same here? If that was the case, then it would still be very different. There were no spies or eyes and ears of the 5 sects here. He took a few steps back, and arrived beside those lizard eggs. Now that he was here, the killing intent was no longer apparent. Perhaps an ordinary lizard had come here by accident, and then eaten the blood here, beginning its rapid path of evolution. It gave birth here, wanting its descendants to also absorb this kind of precious blood, so that they could develop their own pack into a powerful force in a short period of time. Perhaps it was precisely because there was too little time that these ferocious creatures had not developed intelligence. When that female lizard reached a certain cultivation level, she had gone to find food for the small lizards, which resulted in the disappearance of the whole group of miners. As for that ancient site, it should be a coincidence. Coincidentally, the miners dug through there, and before they could report it, they had already suffered a calamity. No matter what, this explanation still made sense. Ling Han looked at the blood on the ground, slightly apprehensive. This was human blood, and it was unknown how many years he had been dead for. Even if it was very nutritious, he still felt a psychological barrier stopping him from actually wanting to consume it. After hesitating for a while, he decided to let it go. He began to return, and as his power increased explosively again, his speed naturally also increased to a new height. He only spent a day and a half, and he had already returned to the ancient Tao sect. After seeing Sun Jianfang, he told him the whole story from beginning to end. He didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt about this matter, so he naturally didn't need to hide it. Moreover, he had already consumed the treasured fruits, so he wasn't afraid of others coveting it. What? There's actually such a thing? Sun Jianfang was furious. Li Changdan, Rui Yuanliang, and Yang Fei were too arrogant. They actually dared to commit a crime in the territory of the sect? Fortunately, the Tao child that he had chosen was truly freakish. Not only had these 3 people failed to kill Ling Han, but they had even lost their lives. An ancient historical site appeared in the mine? Sun Jianfang was stunned again. This must be the real site of the ancient Tao sect. However, the transformation of heaven and earth isn't complete yet, so only this part of it has appeared now. He was extremely excited, and immediately convened an elder-level meeting to inform them of this matter. Ling Han also attended. He was the Tao child, the future sect master, so he was naturally qualified to attend. Moreover, he was also the one who had discovered it, so it was naturally up to him to explain. Hearing his words, Elder Zhu and Sun Jianfang's expressions were the same. They were both extremely excited. The discovery of a new ancient site, what did that mean? Books left behind by an ancient great elite. They were all trapped at the 10 Meridians, the 11 Meridians, the 12 Meridians, and so on. Firstly, it was possible that it was because they themselves were not talented enough, and secondly, it might be that they lacked the guidance of more talented seniors, and did not have a systematic cultivation method. They were sure that in the previous civilization, the 12 Meridians was definitely not the end of martial arts. The level of development of martial arts was probably unimaginable. Thus, if one could obtain a sex martial arts insights, studying them would definitely be extremely beneficial. This was a huge opportunity. So how could these people not be excited? Yet Ling Han remained calm and collected, thinking that there was no chance. His talent in formations could be said to have surpassed anyone else, and added with that purple pendant capable of suppressing formations, he just barely managed to pluck 3 treasured fruits, but was still unable to enter the buildings. As for others? He now possessed 10 Meridians level power, and he didn't believe that anyone could surpass him. Thus, these people could only be disappointed in the end. He didn't say anything, nor did he mention the purple pendant. He only said that he had some accomplishments in formations. Otherwise, some old geezers would definitely become greedy. Soon, Sun Jianfang and the others reached a consensus. They were going to immediately head to the Jade Dragon Mine. Ling Han also hurriedly washed up, then took some dried meat and rations with him, and similarly set out. After more than a day's journey, they once again arrived at the Jade Dragon Mine. Ling Han was in charge of leading the team, and they all held lamps in their hands. They first arrived at the site of the historical site. Li Changdan's corpse was still lying there. When they saw his fatal injury, the elders all looked at Ling Han with strange expressions. They were all experienced in battle, and could tell with a single glance that Ling Han had used his overwhelming power to crush Li Changdan and kill him. A 9 Meridians had killed another 9 Meridians with his bare fists in a head-on confrontation. Furthermore, it was a prodigy like Li Changdan. What did this mean about Ling Han's strength? It had only been around 4 months, and this brat had already reached such heights. Some were wary, while others had other thoughts. For example, Higuan. He was thinking, could his granddaughter be betrothed to Ling Han? Previously, he had wanted to marry her to Li Changdan because of Li Changdan's future potential. Now, compared to Ling Han, Li Changdan was practically trash. However, everyone's attention quickly turned to the ancient site ahead of them. Such a large area of buildings was something that no one had ever set foot in before. It was very likely that there were martial arts books from the civilization of the last era hidden inside. If one obtained them, one might be able to soar in terms of cultivation level. They tried to advance, and all of them were cautious. However, they had only taken a single step, and they had all fled back in an incredibly sorry state. Some had their clothes slashed, and some had even suffered superficial injuries. Fortunately, no one had their arms or legs broken. After all, everyone was on guard. The treasure was right in front of their eyes, yet they could only look on. Everyone felt an itch in their hearts, feeling an indescribable gloom. "Let's go and take a look at that ancient corpse." Sun Jianfang waved his hand and made a decision. They arrived at the other part of the mine. Before they had even reached it, the stench had already assaulted them, causing everyone to involuntarily cover their noses. The ancient corpse appeared before them, but no one dared to approach. They had a feeling that they would die if they did. "This should be that cultivation level above Meridian opening tier," Gu Tang declared excitedly. "The path hasn't been severed, the path hasn't been severed." He didn't have any descendants, and what he loved most was money and beautiful women. However, only cultivation was his true pursuit. It was just that he had long since lost all hope of advancing further, so he could only chase after women and money. Chapter 31-37 31-37 Proposing Marriage. Chapter 31-37 31-37 Proposing Marriage. 31-37 Proposing Marriage. When martial arts began to flourish, everyone deduced that they would be ushering in a great era. However, this progress was a little slow. After more than 100 years, the peak stage of martial arts was still the 12 Meridians, even if countless people were extremely sure that there was a higher cultivation level above the 12 Meridians, but no one had ever reached it. Thus, this also made people wonder if this was perhaps just an illusion. One's power was limited at times, and a 12 Meridians could attain 50,000 kilograms of might. This was extremely terrifying. If one surpassed this foundation, would their human body be able to withstand it? But now, they had seen an ancient corpse with their own eyes, and experienced the pressure that surpassed the 12 meridians, which instantly strengthened their hearts that yearned for improvement in martial arts. There was no end to the path of martial arts. At least, if there was, it was definitely not the 12 meridians. Everyone searched carefully, and discovered a smaller cave in the depths of the cave. That cave was connected to an underground river. They were sure that the female lizard should have followed this underground river and coincidentally arrived here. It was strong because of the ancient corpse's blood. Originally, it might only have regarded this place as its lair, but the miners just happened to dig through this place. Thus, the female lizard charged out, and treated everyone as its food. The ancient corpse can't be moved, but the blood can, Sun Jianfang immediately said. Collect the blood and take it back for study. They fetched vessels and collected the corpse blood, then brought it back to the ancient Tao sect. The mine was reopened, and new miners were recruited to start work. There were also new supervisors in place. However, the last batch of miners was completely eliminated, leaving behind a terrifying legend. Later, the rumors spread that this mine had a demonic nature and would devour the miners, causing the ancient Tao sect to be unable to recruit people. Ling Han also returned to the ancient Tao sect. His life returned to normal, and he spent all day cultivating. He searched for information about formations on the optical computer, but unfortunately, there were very few books from the ancient times that had been unearthed. Aside from those found early on at the beginning, when there were also people who publicized them in order to increase the strength of the entire human race to fight against the demonic beasts. As time progressed, everyone kept their techniques to themselves. For example, even the elders could only learn 3 to 5 moves of the 4 directional fists, so how could they share it with all the surviving humans? Thus, Ling Han could only learn the 3 elements formation, and a few of the simplest formations. As for the more profound formations, perhaps books about formations hadn't appeared yet, or perhaps someone had mastered it, but kept it secret. Ling Han suddenly thought that if he had mastered high-level formations, he definitely wouldn't have publicized it so widely. Now that the heaven and earth had changed, ancient sites had appeared one after another, yet they were all protected by formations. If he had mastered formations, he would be able to secretly make a fortune. Who would be stupid enough to publicize it? Wasn't he afraid that he would be captured by some force, and forced to focus on unraveling formations, yet would only be able to get a sliver of profit? Several days passed, and Huan Shui walked over to report to Ling Han that someone wanted to pay him a visit. Who is it? Ling Han asked. He had instructed Huan Shui that he would not meet any guests, but the usually obedient little female attendant actually reported it to him, indicating that the visitor was of high status, and Huan Shui could not refuse. Elder He, Huan Shui said. Oh? Ling Han was surprised. Why had He Guan come to find him? He stood up. Since he knew that He Guan had come, he naturally had to personally go and receive him. Though the Tao child was the future sect master, he was still not as powerful as an elder now. Elder He. Ling Han opened the door and saw that He Guan was indeed standing at the door. However, there was also a young girl with an arrogant expression He meowing. What the hell was this? Ha, Tao child Ling, this old man didn't disturb you, did I? He Guan smiled amiably. No. Ling Han also smiled, and invited the two of them in. After exchanging pleasantries, He Guan praised Ling Han for a while. He praised Ling Han for being young and promising, causing Ling Han to doubt whether the person he was talking about was him or not. Was he, Ling Han, really that good? Finally, He Guan finally revealed the true purpose of their trip. Tao child Ling, you're not young anymore. As the old saying goes, one can only aspire for success after marriage. He wore a beaming smile, and continued. I'm not boasting, but this granddaughter of mine is both beautiful and has good moral character. In the future, she'll definitely be a good wife and mother. Ling Han was surprised. Was the old geezer trying to betroth He Miaoying to him? The problem was, Li Changdan had only been dead for a few days, and he was already impatient. Ling Han looked at He Miaoying, and this woman's expression was filled with arrogance. He shook his head and said, "At present, I have no plans to marry, so I will have to disappoint Elder He's kind offer." "Ling Han, what are you so smug about?" He Miaoying immediately jumped up and pointed at Ling Han, her face filled with anger. "The fact that I agreed to marry you is already the virtue that your ancestors have accumulated for 8 lifetimes, and you actually dare to despise me?" "Little Een!" He Guan hurriedly said darkly. He had just praised his granddaughter as the most virtuous and best wife, yet in the blink of an eye, she had revealed the face of an unruly young lady. Wasn't this a slap to his face? Only then did He Miaoying shut up, but the corners of her lips still curled up, looking defiant. He, marriage is a big matter, so there's no need to rush to make a decision. You can consider carefully. He Guan gave himself a way out, then left with his granddaughter. "Young master, thank goodness you didn't agree. Otherwise, if you married Miss He, you would definitely be bullied in the future." Huan Shui escorted them out, and when she returned, she began to complain. Ling Han laughed loudly and said, "It's always been me bullying others. How can I be bullied by others?" He Miaoying? Even if he was given the position of master over the entire celestial sea planet, he could not possibly marry such a woman. However, after being rejected like this, the He clan wouldn't give up so easily, especially He Miaoying. She was so conceited, and now that she had been rejected, she would definitely fly into a humiliated rage. However, he already had the power of 10 Meridians, and only 10 Meridians elites or above could pose a threat to him. Could it be that He Miaoying could still incite existences such as the elders to attack him? He couldn't be bothered to pay her any regard. In any case, he would deal with whatever came his way. Another few days later, the appraisal of the ancient corpse's blood was finally completed. There were extremely astonishing energy factors contained within, which were extremely beneficial for the growth of living beings. However, there was also a great amount of poison contained within. If it was directly consumed, it could possibly be fatal. This should also be the reason why those lizards had strong poison in their claws, but why did they not die? It could only be assumed that these lizards were far more resistant to poison than humans. The ancient Tao sect was presently refining this corpse blood, ingesting it or injecting it in the manner of medicine. It should be extremely helpful in improving one's cultivation level. Ling Han shook his head. He really didn't want to touch something like the blood of a corpse. There were many ways to increase cultivation level, so there was no need to use this kind of thing. However, while he had such scruples, the other disciples did not. They were all filled with anticipation, hoping that the successful development of these medicines would help them grow wings that could make them soar. A few days later, Ling Han was called over by Sun Jianfang, who said that he had discovered the volcanic fruit. Chapter 3138 Volcanic Fruit. Chapter 3138 Volcanic Fruit. 3138 Volcanic Fruit. At the beginning of the upheaval of heaven and earth, in the ancient site that was first discovered, a great deal of information was publicized for everyone to study, in an attempt to find a way to help humans escape their predicament. Among them were the 3 elements formation, and the most superficial formations. There was also a book of rare medicines, which recorded a large amount of information about precious fruits. By now, practically every force had a copy of this kind of information, which was extremely practical. The volcanic fruit was a treasured fruit that was recorded in the collection of rare medicines. It could allow cultivators of 9 meridians and above to successfully advance to the next cultivation level. The significance of this was extraordinary. From the 9 meridians to the 10 meridians, this was a qualitative leap. When power could be released, it could multiply one's battle prowess many times over even. It was also because of this that it was incredibly difficult to cross the threshold from the 9 meridians to the 10 meridians. Prodigies like Li Changnan were stuck at the peak stage of the 9 meridians for more than a year, yet they still couldn't see any hope of breaking through. Among the ancient Tao sect's prodigies, the fastest to break through to the 10 meridians was 54 years old, and this record was set by Sun Jianfang. At that time, rare medicines appeared all over the world, and there was no clear division of forces. Thus, the difficulty level of obtaining precious fruits wasn't very high. Most of the time, it was dependent on luck. But it was different now. Practically all the famous mountains and lakes which contained treasure trees and spiritual herbs were occupied by various forces, and they wanted to snatch food from the tiger's mouth. This was as difficult as ascending the heavens. In the case of this volcanic fruit, it had appeared in a pool and it had been discovered by accident. However, there was also a python in this pool. It had definitely reached 10 meridians, and was constantly standing guard by the side of that volcanic fruit. If it had been any other treasured fruit, because everyone would have been wary of this python, they might have just let it go. However, they could not do that with the volcanic fruit. This could allow cultivators above the 8 meridians to take another step forward. It was too precious. As long as they didn't reach the 12 meridians, everyone would desire this. Moreover, this giant python definitely hadn't reached the 12 meridians, but what force didn't have elites of 12 meridians keeping watch? This naturally boosted their courage. Sun Jianfang would personally lead a team to that pool. However, their greatest opponent wasn't the python, but the elites sent by other forces. Such a good thing would definitely cause fights. Who didn't want to have another 10 meridians elite in their force? If one relied on himself to cultivate, it would really be difficult to accomplish that without reaching 70 or 80 years old, and by that time, the bodily functions would already be slowly degenerating. No matter how strong the mystical power was, his physical power would still be limited, and it would definitely affect his battle prowess. Power feared those who was younger and fitter. This was the logic. Thus, when this news spread out, the nearby forces would definitely be restless. There was no time to lose. Only a day later, Ling Han set out with Sun Jianfang. Accompanying them were Gu Tang and the other senior elders, as well as the younger generation like Nie Yang, Lao Lian and Tan Gaobua. These elders all had their own plans. They wanted to leave the volcanic fruit for their own descendants. As long as they ingested it when they were in the 9 meridians, they would be able to soar all the way to 10 meridians. If one could advance into 10 meridians before 30 years old, then his future prospects would really be boundless. This pool was located at Sealed Mountains, and it was about 10 days' journey from the ancient Tao sect. And that was still with no delays on this journey, or it would take even longer. Ling Han was curious, and asked, "After such a long time, could it be that volcanic fruit has not been plucked yet?" Sun Jianfang smiled and said, "The volcanic fruit hasn't ripened yet, so even if someone arrives at this time, they won't be able to harvest it. At most, they'll only be able to get rid of that python." So that was how it was. They journeyed day and night, and would only rest when they were really tired. However, every day, when the sun rose, no one would miss out on the half an hour of cultivation time. They were all practicing fist techniques there. Ling Han found an excuse and walked far away. He used the brother monkey cultivation technique to cultivate. After he finished cultivating, he met up with the others. However, he couldn't always leave with an excuse. Sometimes, Ling Han would have to follow everyone and use the 4-directional fists technique to absorb the mystical power of heaven and earth. However, the power he absorbed this way had too many impurities and was too impure. He would have to purify it with the brother monkey cultivation technique later. It would both slow down his progress and waste time. Thankfully, it was only about 10 days, and on the 11th day, they had arrived at Sealed Mountains. There were no ancient sites on this mountain, so it wasn't occupied by any human force. In fact, there weren't even many demonic beasts in fact. Moreover, at most, they were 2 meridians, 3 meridians or so. Thus, very few people would come here. It was also because a herb harvester had come here to try his luck, and in the end, he saw that python by the side of a pool, and when he ventured closer to take a look, he discovered the existence of the volcanic fruit. That person sold this information to a considerable number of forces, and it was also because of this that the news leaked out in the end, making it known to everyone. In Ling Han's group, there were as many as 8 elites above 10 meridians. This force was too powerful. Occasionally, they would encounter wild beasts or demonic beasts, and they would be killed with a palm strike or a punch from afar, becoming their next meal. When a demonic beast evolved, it was using mystical power to temper its body. This meat was also extraordinarily delicious. Even if it was only roasted, it was still incredibly delicious. Nye Yang, Tangaobua, and the other young people usually stayed in the sect. There weren't any demonic beasts in Hyping Mountain, so they had to eat their fill when they went out. This made them feel like they didn't want to return. As he walked, Ling Han saw too many city ruins. The majority of them were abandoned, and some had become a playground for demonic beasts, occupied by them. In their place, the new cities built by humans were iron castles that were used to resist the invasion of demonic beasts. But even so, there were still castles that had been conquered. There was a place that made Sun Jianfang and the others dumbfounded, unable to speak for a long time. That was because this castle had been flattened with a single stomp. Just how colossal was his physique, and how terrifying was his power, to be able to flatten a steel fortress that had been forged from earth element iron. If such a terrifying beast invaded the ancient Tao sect, would the ancient Tao sect be able to stop it? According to Sun Jianfeng's deduction, this should have been a creature among the demonic beasts that had been the first to break through to a cultivation level above the Meridian opening tier. Its power had undergone a world-shaking improvement, and that was why it had such terrifying might. This wasn't good news. The reason why humans could struggle at death's door was because 12 Meridians elites had appeared among humans, capable of matching the strongest of demonic beasts. However, once a being that surpassed 12 Meridians elites appeared among demonic beasts, the balance would be broken. Don't worry too much. The ancient Tao sect is protected by formations, and it's not a place that just anyone can barge in as they please. Sun Jianfang saw that everyone's morale was a little low, so he comforted them. Then, he said something very domineering. In any case, I'm still here. What's there to be afraid of? This was the pillar of support for the ancient Tao sect. Back then, it was Sun Jianfang who had flattened Hyping Mountain with his fists. Even the demonic beast had no choice but to retreat, surrendering this treasure mountain. He Guan and the others all nodded, but they had other worries. Sun Jianfang was old, after all, and was close to the limit of 150 years old. How many more years could he last? Chapter 31-39 10 Forces. Chapter 31-39, 3139 10 Forces. 31-39 10 Forces. Sealed mountains were filled with mountains that extended endlessly, with innumerable dangerous peaks. The target of Ling Han and the others was one of the mountains called Heaven Gazing Peak. The mountain slopes were extraordinarily steep. Fortunately, they were all above 7 meridians, at the very least. Their power was as high as 5,000 kilograms, and they were agile. Dangerous peaks weren't a big problem. However, the mountain was dangerous, after all, and it was difficult to climb. Thus, they still spent half a day's time to finally arrive at the mountain peak. An ordinary mountain peak was naturally sharp, like a sharp sword that pierced directly into the clouds, but this mountain peak was flat, like a bald head. On such a flat mountain peak, there was a pool. It was oval in shape, and at its longest, it was about 300 meters or so. At its widest, it was only about 150 meters. On the mountain peak, this pool really did not seem small. The sun was clearly shining brightly, but everyone felt a coldness rise up in their hearts. They had to channel their power to stimulate their blood flow, and only then would they be spared from being frozen. This cold air came from the pool. Above the pool, because the hot air encountered coldness, it turned into fog, making one feel as if they were floating. Ling Han and the others naturally weren't the only ones on the mountain peak. There were also 9 groups of people, each occupying a specific spot. The number of people in each group varied. At least, there were only 9 of them, and at most, there were 20 plus of them. However, they had one similarity, and that was they were old and young, and the gap in age was very wide. The ancient Tao sect is here! When they saw Sun Jianfang and his group, these forces spoke up one after another. Even Sun Jianfang has been mobilized? Hee, looks like the ancient Tao sect really values this. Hasn't your Netherworld faction also mobilized Meng Ruining, Leader Meng? Hee, for the sake of volcanic fruit, this is very normal. Sun Jianfang's eyes swept over them, and paused on every group of people. He smiled and said, "There are really a lot of old friends here. Old geezer son, you're not dead yet." A white-haired old man called out loudly. His body was thick and sturdy. Even though he was old, he was like a human-shaped bear, exuding an astonishing feeling of power. "This is Ji Yuanlong, the sect master of the Divine Wind sect." Sun Jianfang introduced in a low voice to Ling Han and the others. Then he laughed loudly. "Old geezer Ji, you didn't die yet, so do you have the nerve to curse me? You're already at 12 meridians, so why are you still here?" Ji Yuanlong asked. Sun Jianfang shook his head. "Isn't it the same as you? I can't let go. I heard that your ancient Tao sect has a prodigy called Li Dan or something. Just in time, I also have a great-grandson, who can be considered quite successful. Why don't we let them spar for a while?" Ji Yuanlong said. He waved his hand, and a young man walked out. His figure was also extremely sturdy, like an iron tower. This young man clasped his hands in greeting, and said to Ling Han, "I am Ji Pengfei, and would like to ask Senior Brotherly for some guidance." Sun Jianfang's mouth involuntarily twitched. Li Changdan had betrayed the sect, and he had long since been killed by Ling Han. How could he come out to spar? However, this was an internal scandal, so there was naturally no reason to publicize it. He said indifferently, "Li Changdan didn't come." Ji Yuanlong glared at him, and said, "Old geezer son, are you afraid of losing?" Sun Jianfang looked at Ji Yuanlong and said, "If you are not convinced, I'll beat you into submission." Ji Yuanlong was instantly enraged. He rolled up his sleeves and said, "Fine, we'll fight. Do you think I'm afraid of you? Hee, calm down, both of you. Don't be so tense." Someone stepped out to mediate the fight. He was also indescribably old. His white brows drooped down for about an inch, and even his eyes were covered. Who knew if he could see clearly? "Why don't we compete and see who can kill the giant python in the water first?" This was Chao Tsong from the Blue Feather City. He belonged to the same generation as Sun Jianfang and Ji Yuanlong. Now, he was also naturally the strongest king tier of the 12 meridians. "How do we kill it?" Ji Yuanlong asked with a roll of his eyes. He had a fiery temper, and it was as if he didn't like anyone he saw. "We can hold our breath for at most 10 minutes, yet this pool is extraordinarily deep. It's impossible to kill that demonic beast in such a short amount of time. A giant snake above the level of 9 meridians, its gallbladder is a treasure." An old woman clicked her tongue and said, "According to the ancient books, this can turn into 100 poisons, and can also nourish the eyes and improve the vision. What's the use of talking about this?" Ji Yuanlong still had a bad temper, and he would speak back to anyone he saw. "Can you force that giant python out, or can you hold your breath for half an hour? I can't be bothered to talk to you." The old woman waved her sleeve and didn't reply. It was as if she knew that this old geezer had a strange temper, so she didn't lower herself to his level. "Actually, there is a way." An old man walked out. He was dressed in robes, and was waving a feather fan in his hand, looking quite sage-like. However, when they saw this old man walk out, both Sun Jianfang and Chao Tsong frowned. Even Ji Yuanlong didn't oppose him. "Old poisonous creature, you're always playing with poison, and you're actually still alive. This is really a miracle," the old woman said instead. The old man in robes laughed loudly. "If we still do not break through, in 10 years at most, it would be about time for us to step into the coffin, right?" Sun Jianfang and the others were all solemn. The limit of their lifespans had always been a problem that they had deliberately avoided. This old poisonous creature was also from the same generation as them. At that time, he had been a doctor who had saved lives and healed injuries, but who knew that after the great calamity, he was further and further down the path of playing with poison, causing others to feel wary. Afterwards, he established the 100 Poison sect, and took in a considerable number of disciples, all of whom were skilled in poison. Poison has always been feared by others. Even the king tier of the 12 Meridians didn't dare to be careless in the slightest. Old Venom, what do you suggest? Ji Yuanlong asked. His tone was slightly more polite than usual. Simple, Old Venom said calmly. He took out a bottle from his robes, walked to the side of the pool, opened the cork, and carefully dripped a drop of liquid. He revealed a smile and said, "This is a new type of poison that I've carefully developed. Don't underestimate it. Although there's only one drop, it can turn the entire pool into a pool of strong poison." Everyone came over to take a look, and saw that the originally clear pool was rapidly turning black. There was also a faint pungent smell that assaulted their noses, causing them to feel dizzy. This was truly terrifying. Merely the smell was already making them so uncomfortable, then what would happen if the body really touched it? Boom! Right at this moment, ripples appeared on the water surface, and a large snake as thick as a water bucket suddenly broke through the water's surface, turning into something akin to a stream and soaring onto the shore. Sure enough, this poison was far too terrifying. Even the demonic beast that was as powerful as a king tier was unable to withstand it. Once ashore, this large snake coiled its body, its head protecting its body that was like a small hill. It swept its gaze around proudly, its eyes like lanterns, exuding a murderous light that would make one shiver. "Old Venom, you've poisoned the volcanic fruit as well!" Ji Yuanlong roared. "Don't worry. A treasure like the volcanic fruit is only afraid of fire attacks. Poison is harmless against it," Old Venom said calmly. "Now that this large snake has come out, how do you guys want to kill it?" Chapter 3140 Young King Tier. Chapter 3140 Young King Tier. 3140 Young King Tier. If this large snake had stayed hidden in the pool, even King Tiers of 12 Meridians would frown and have no confidence of killing it. However, it was a different story now that it was ashore. It was like a tiger that had its teeth pulled out, and no longer had any intimidation. That was because it was only at 10 Meridians, and had just advanced into the ranks of King Tiers. "How about this?" The old woman spoke up. "We don't have many years left to live, so why don't we give this opportunity to the younger generation?" "What do you mean?" Ji Yuanlong asked. "The older generation can't make a move. Let the youngsters do it. Whoever can kill this vicious creature, the volcanic fruit will belong to him." "How about it?" the old woman said. This tempted a great many people, because once a fight broke out over the volcanic fruit, it may cripple or even kill the king tiers of their own forces. To sacrifice a king tier for a king tier level fruit was naturally not worth it. However, if it was a competition between juniors, and the one that would be killed was a giant python at that, they would naturally be able to avoid this problem. "I agree." Sun Jianfang was the first to nod. "Sect Master!" Gu Tang and He Guan called out at the same time. They were naturally worried about leaving such an important contest in the hands of Ling Han and the other juniors. The volcanic fruit was a treasure that even they valued highly. Moreover, if Ling Han, Nie Yang, and the others really obtained the volcanic fruit, how could they bring themselves to ask for it? "I've made up my mind!" Sun Jianfan showed his decisive side, not giving Gu Tang and the others any chance to speak. Gu Tang and the others could only shut their mouths reluctantly. Who asked them not to be the top king tiers of 12 Meridians? They were no match for him. "All right, I also agree. This way, there would be no need to hurt the harmony between us, all right." "That's it then." All the forces agreed. Since there were no members of the older generation participating, they were all filled with confidence in the members of the younger generation that they had brought. "The four of you have to work together and unite," Sun Jian said solemnly to Ling Han and the others. "Yes." Ling Han and the others all nodded. The meaning behind Sun Jianfang's words was naturally because there was an external enemy in front of them, so they couldn't have internal strife. The four of them stepped out, and the young people from the other forces also walked out one after another. There were 10 forces, and there seemed to be about more than 30 people. Everyone surrounded the giant python, but no one made a move rashly. This was a 10 Meridians king tier, and furthermore, it was a demonic beast. Ordinarily, it would not be a problem for it to match 2 to 3 human 10 Meridians king tiers. They were competing, and it was a competition to see who would be able to kill this giant python. The person who made the first move would not get any benefits at all. One of them looked towards Ling Han and said, "What is it?" "After Li Changdan became the Tao child, he is now putting on airs. Only the few of you are sent out. Aren't you just here to help?" This was a disciple of Ji Yuanlong. By the looks of it, their branch had been led astray by Ji Yuanlong. Another person said, "So what if Li Changdan was here? He is only a 9 meridians." This was a tall, slender man, his face filled with pride. "Only a 9 meridians? TSK. Judging by his tone, it was as if he were a king tier of 10 meridians. Seeing that everyone was looking towards him, this person said proudly, "I am Blue Feather City Sima Rong. Greetings, everyone." He clasped his hands in greeting, seeming to be very polite, but the pride on his face clearly showed his arrogant nature. "Brother Sima, in your eyes, 9 meridians doesn't seem to be much, right?" someone said to Sima Rong. Hee. Sima Rong merely laughed, then looked towards that giant python. "Those who have not reached 10 meridians should obediently step aside, and not seek your own death." Hiss! Everyone was shocked. From the meaning of his words, it seemed like he really was a 10 meridians. But how could this be possible? Over the past 100 years, aside from the earliest batch of people, who didn't need to be in their 60s or 70s to be able to open 10 meridians and advance into king tier? However, Sima Rong looked to be only 24 to 25 years old, and he had already become a 10 meridians? If this were true, then he had undoubtedly set a new record. "You guys should go out and travel more. Who knows how big the outside world is?" Sima Rong said proudly, sweeping a disdainful gaze over the masses. Then, with a battle cry, he charged towards the large snake. He was really fierce. Against a 10 meridians king tier level beast, he actually dared to charge out alone. At least, this courage was worthy of admiration. Shua, the giant python, also began its attack. Its thick and long tail whipped over, bringing with it a whistling wind. This snake was as thick as a bucket, and its length was about 30 meters. Its weight was probably a few thousand kilograms. How terrifying would it be for it to lash out with about 50,000 kilograms of strength of a 10 meridians? Pun! The attack landed, and Sima Rong's whole person was instantly sent flying. However, the giant python had also lost a considerable number of scales, as well as blood. Though this was negligible for the colossal body of the giant python, it was enough to show how strong Sima Rong was. This guy was definitely a 10 meridians elite. Seeing this scene, everyone was speechless. No wonder Sima Rong was so overbearing. Such a young 10 meridians indeed had the right to be arrogant. But how was this possible? There were indeed prodigies who could reach the 9 meridians in their 20s. Li Changdan was an example of that, but to take another step further was as difficult as ascending the heavens. How exactly did this guy cultivate? Could it be that he had eaten the volcanic fruit before? Ha ha! Sima Rong laughed loudly, and charged back. The force of the python's strike only sent him flying, but did not cause him any injury. "Let's go!" The others looked at each other, and made their moves. Since Sima Rong was the main force, they only needed to add insult to injury. This was a competition to see who could kill the giant python, and not who would have the greatest contribution towards the kill. There would be a chance. However, they had clearly underestimated the python's battle prowess. It merely turned around and lashed out. Boom! A terrifying gust of wind assaulted them. Pun pun pun! Immediately, 7 or 8 people were sent flying. Power was released, and there was no need for it to come physically close to them at all. Ling Han could clearly see that the effective distance for 10 meridians to release their power was about 3 feet. If it was any further, the power would begin to dissipate, and when it was around 10 feet, it would no longer be a threat. Thus, it might seem that Sima Rong had exchanged a blow with the giant python, but in truth, there was no real contact. Instead, they exchanged blows with the force that they had released. But in a situation when they could not release their power, how could the others possibly be a match for the giant python? The power gap was too wide, and the body of the giant python was a super weapon. As its tail swept out, there was no one that could match it at all. If one didn't have the power of the 10 Meridians, he could only rely on the sea of people to exhaust the power of this python if he wanted to defeat it. After all, King Tears had limited power, and it was impossible for them to expend it endlessly. Bunch of trash! Cimarron had previously maintained a modest attitude, but now, he completely looked down on everyone. He rushed over, brandishing his fists furiously. All of you get lost, don't get in the way! Pun pun pun! As he charged over, the strong winds he created sent those around him flying, showing his overwhelming power. Chapter 3141 3141 4 times of overlapping power. Chapter 3141 3141 4 times of overlapping power. 3141 4 times of overlapping power. Without the cultivation level of 10 Meridians, it was really very difficult to interfere in the battle between two King Tiers. Those like Nieyang, Lao Lian and Tan Gaobo were completely insufficient. A mere 7 Meridians or 8 Meridians was not even qualified to charge up and deliver a sword strike in this kind of battle. Only a 9 Meridians or 8 Meridians could be considered battle prowess. However, the 9 Meridians could only circle around and fight. The python's skin was thick and tough, and it was extremely powerful. If one was swept by its tail, or its body collided with them, their skin would definitely split open and bones would be broken. Right now, there were only 9 people who were truly battling. Aside from Cimarron, the other 8 people were all at the cultivation level of 9 Meridians. As for the others, they were truly minor characters. Ling Han didn't make a move. Since they were competing to see who could kill the giant python, why was he rushing so quickly? He was observing the giant python's attacks, and he could clearly see the weak points in its attacks. He had just lost power, but his insight and judgment would not decrease. Add to that the fact that he was cultivating the demonic monkey fists. What kind of superior technique was this? It was really nothing difficult for him to see through the attack of a mere 10 Meridians. It wasn't long before Ling Han saw through the giant python's attack patterns. A smile involuntarily tugged at the corners of his lips. Get lost! Get lost! You trash, don't get in my way! Cimarron roared loudly. Pun pun pun, 2 punches shot out, and actually sent the 2 cultivators that were blocking in front of him flying. Previously, they had only been sent flying by the force he had released, so it was understandable. After all, he hadn't directly attacked anyone. Now, however, it was a completely different story. The 2 sect elders of these 2 cultivators instantly wore furious expressions. They all looked towards Chao Kang. This was a member of Blue Feather CID, so they naturally had to demand an explanation from Chao Kang. Chao Tsung merely stroked his beard and smiled. It is a competition, so it is inevitable that there would be some stumbling over one another. Take one of my Break Dragon Flash! Cimarron leaped up high, and pulled back his right fist, as if he was accumulating power. Visibly, there were layers of light wrapped around his fist. What? The elites exclaimed in astonishment. After advancing into 10 Meridians, one could release their power, and could be called a King Tier. However, power was invisible, and could not be seen with the naked eye. Now, Cimarron's punch actually had a halo of light wrapped around it. That was a scene that would only appear when power was compounded. A 10 Meridians power was already terrifying enough. From 30,000 kilograms at the very least, their peak could reach 50,000 kilograms. With this added together, how terrifying would their destructive power be? What kind of technique was this Break Dragon Flash? So impressive! Ling Han's eyes also flashed. Though his power had exceeded 50,000 kilograms, he definitely could not overlap his power like this. However, within the demonic monkey fists, this was actually a very ordinary technique. However, limited by his cultivation level, Ling Han was still unable to do this. This kind of layering did not mean that the power of 50,000 kilograms would become 100,000 kilograms, or 200,000 kilograms. Instead, it was a continuous barrage of attacks, with practically no pause. Pung, Sima Rong's figure descended, and a heavy punch landed. Even if the giant python was an anomaly, with naturally thick skin and tough flesh, it still couldn't withstand such a bombardment. With a shake of its massive snake's head, its whole body was sent flying in a slanting arc. A large part of the place where his fist landed had clearly caved in, as if it had been harshly struck by a massive rock, and one could imagine just how painful it had to be with one look. Everyone inhaled sharply. Even the giant python, a creature that was born with astonishing defenses, had been punched into such a state. If it was a human, then even if he was hidden in an armor forged from refined metal, he would probably still be smashed into a pancake, right? It should be overlapping power 4 times, Ling Han judged. He had seen in the demonic monkey fists that the limit of overlapping power was 108 layers. This naturally far surpassed Sima Rome. However, while this might be the limit, it did not mean that whoever cultivated it would definitely be able to reach it. I have to reach 10 meridians as soon as possible. Only then would I be able to release my power and cultivate the power of overlap, Ling Han thought. Otherwise, if it was power alone that reached 10 meridians, he still could not be called a king tier. This is overlapping 5 layers of power, right? Someone among the king tiers also exclaimed in shock. There aren't as many as 5 layers, it should be 4 layers of overlapped power, Meng Runing said in a deep voice. He was at 12 meridians, so he could see things more clearly. 4 layers is already terrifying enough, the old woman said, her eyes burning. The gaze she directed at Sima Rong was a little strange. Among the techniques we've obtained, we can only stack 3 layers of power at most. Old Venom chuckled and said, Chao Tsong, you're really hiding your strength. Sima Rong was brought here by Chao Tsong, and all his abilities must have been taught by Chao Kong. However, no one knew how stunned Chao Tsong was at this moment. He had indeed taught Sima Rong, but he had definitely not taught him anything about the break dragon flash that could overlap power 4 times. If he really grasped this kind of secret technique, he would definitely treat it as his trump card. He would definitely not pass it on until the moment of his death. This disciple had gone out to train for a few years, so why had it become that he did not even recognize him after his return? Ha, a mere demonic beast, you think you can be insolent in front of me? Sima Rong was more and more arrogant. He charged out, and blasted the giant python madly. Under the suppression of the 4 layers of power, it was equivalent to having 4 Sima Rong attacking it at the same time. Even if the giant python was a demonic beast, and was born stronger than humans in terms of physique, it could only match 2 to 3 10 meridians at most, but 4? It definitely couldn't beat them. Hence, the giant python was instantly blasted into a sorry state, leaving behind pieces of scales on the ground. In a one-on-one situation, being able to suppress a demonic beast of the same cultivation level was really too shocking. The younger generation were all convinced. If they were to fight a demonic beast of the same cultivation level, it was absolutely impossible that they would have such a crushing advantage. Don't be discouraged, Sun Jianfang said. Before 10 meridians, it's indeed very difficult for us cultivators to contend with demonic beasts, because the natural conditions of our bodies are too different. However, as long as we advance into 10 meridians and can release our power, and the technique we cultivate can truly begin to show its might, this is the true time for cultivators to rise. Hearing his words, the youngsters finally regained their fighting spirit. They were inferior to Sima Rong, not because they were inferior in natural talent, but rather because they had not reached 10 meridians yet. However, the older generation shook their heads internally. This was not just a gap in cultivation level, but also a difference in technique. For example, the technique they cultivated could only reach 3 overlapping layers of power. Even though there was only 1 less overlapping layer of power, how could 3 against 4 be the same? They naturally would not say these words, to avoid damaging the confidence of these young people. After all, they were all their descendants and disciples. The king tiers of the older generation all shook their heads. Looks like there should be no doubt about Sima Rong's victory, and he was now 10 meridians. If he ingested the volcanic fruit, wouldn't he immediately become 11 meridians? Hiss, a 24 to 25-year-old 11 meridians king tier was too inconceivable. Ling Han cracked his neck. It was time for him to take the field. Xiao, he charged out. Ha! Ji Yuanlong laughed loudly and said, Old geezer son, I thought your disciple was as cowardly as a mouse and didn't even dare to attack. Looks like I was wrong. This brat isn't cowardly, but rather slow in reaction, and not just by a little at that. All the elites laughed loudly. Since Sima Rong's victory was already a foregone conclusion, there was no harm in having some fun. Chapter 3142 Killing the Giant Python. Chapter 3142 Killing the Giant Python. 3142 Killing the Giant Python. Sun Jianfang remained calm and collected, and only revealed a faint smile. That may not be the case. Everyone, why don't you quietly take a closer look? Pun! Ling Han unleashed his power, and his figure was extraordinarily fast. This kind of explosive power really does seem a bit like 10 meridians. Meng Ruining was the first to exclaim in surprise. Not necessarily. Some people are born with natural speed, so it wouldn't be strange for the speed of the 9 meridians to be comparable to 10 meridians. If the ancient Tao sect could produce a young 10 meridians king tier, that would really be too incredible. Everyone couldn't believe it. It was already a miracle for such a young 10 meridians king tier to appear once, so how could there possibly be as many as 2? Just wait and see. Ling Han had already charged over. His iron fist clenched, and he used the 4 directional fists. He delivered a heavy strike at the giant python. Pun! The giant python was currently engaged in a fierce battle with Sima Rong, so how could it bother about Ling Han? Instantly it was hit head-on. Under the massive impact, it couldn't help but be sent flying 6 meters away, flattening the rocks that protruded from the ground. However, it was not made of copper and iron after all. This friction caused it to shed a great many scales, and leave behind a considerable amount of blood. Hiss! Everyone inhaled sharply. This was definitely power of a 10 meridians. It had surpassed 30,000 kilograms, and had actually reached 50,000 kilograms. No, his power only exploded when his fist landed on the snake's body. Chao Tsung immediately saw through the truth of the matter. In other words, he didn't release his power. By unleashing one's power, he can hit his opponent faster and also effectively protect himself, avoiding the weakness of our physique, but he didn't use it. There can only be one reason for that. He's still a 9 meridians! Everyone exclaimed in shock. This 9 meridians could possess the power of a 10 meridians, and it was a peak stage 10 meridians at that. How could they believe this? The two are freaks. Someone who has broken through to 10 meridians before 30 years old, and has even cultivated 4 overlapping layers of power. One of them looks to be only 20 years old. He's clearly a 9 meridians elite, yet he possesses the peak stage power of 10 meridians. Is this still the world of cultivation that we know? Sima Rong also raised a corner of his eyes. He was already 100% sure that he could kill the giant python, but Ling Han's sudden intrusion caused him slight surprise. What powerful strength! When had a 9 meridians become so awesome? However, he wanted to compete with him with just that. Without becoming a 10 meridians, he ultimately couldn't be called a king tier. You want to contend with me? Sima Rong charged over. His target wasn't the giant python, but Ling Han. He had a strong confidence that he would be able to easily suppress his opponents even if it was a battle of 2 against 1. Isn't this the competition that we had previously agreed on? Ling Han asked calmly. They were competing to see who would be able to kill the giant python first, so why was it that when it came to Sima Rong, for him to make a move was considered a fault? Humph, how could this hand be stretched randomly? Sima Rong no longer attacked the giant python first, and merely attacked Ling Han repeatedly. So what? Ling Han stepped forward without fear. Pung! The two of them exchanged a blow. Ling Han was using the 4 directional fists, while Sima Rong was still using that break dragon flash, overlapping 4 layers of power, each layer reaching strength as high as 50,000 kilograms. Ling Han's figure swayed, and he retreated 9 steps consecutively. Then, he retreated another 7 steps, and then 5 steps again, and only then did he manage to stabilize himself. Sima Rong, on the other hand, did not retreat in the slightest. It could not be helped. Sima Rong was at 10 meridians, and when he released his power, Ling Han's punch had not landed on his body at all. Naturally, it could not possibly have any effect on him. And under the stacked attacks of 4 overlapping layers of power, Ling Han retreated repeatedly, retreating 3 consecutive times before he managed to steady his footing. This brat, his conventional power is actually superior to Sima Rong. That's right. Otherwise, he should have retreated 4 times, and not 3 times. His 50,000 kilograms of strength is actually not his limit. Everyone was stunned speechless. In this kind of exchange, though Ling Han was at a disadvantage, in terms of true power, Ling Han was slightly superior. How could this be believed? A 9 meridians was actually even more powerful than a 10 meridians. Was this still a world that they knew? Sima Rong's eyes also narrowed. This was the first time that he felt threatened. A mere 9 meridians had actually surpassed him in terms of raw power. If it was not for the fact that he could release his power, and if it was not for the fact that he still had 4 overlapping layers of power, wouldn't he be at a disadvantage? If you don't become a 10 meridians elite, you're still an ant in the end, he said coldly. So what if you're freakish? In the end, you're only a 9 meridians elite. It's impossible for you to win against him. And as long as he ingested that volcanic fruit, he would be able to charge up to 11 meridians. At that time, he would then kill Ling Han. Even if Sun Jianfang interfered, so what? Even if he couldn't fight him to a tie, he would at least be able to retreat unscathed. Is that so? Ling Han asked calmly. His fists moved, and every move he made was a head-on clash with Sima Rong. However, this wasn't just a battle between the two of them. The giant python also approached and launched an attack. In its eyes, Sima Rong and Ling Han were both enemies, so it naturally treated them the same. With a sweep of its tail, the two of them were attacked at the same time. This had become a battle royale between 3 sides. Ling Han, Sima Rong, and the giant python had to fight 2 other opponents at the same time. This was not only dangerous, but also more exhausting. How long can you last? Sima Rong sneered. He couldn't release his power, so Ling Han could only take each blow head-on. The weakness of his physique would undoubtedly be exposed, and he definitely wouldn't be able to last more than a few moves. Ling Han ignored him. Aside from Brother Monkey, no one knew just how astonishing his vitality was. Though his whole body had gone numb from the attacks of Sima Rong and the giant python, he would recover in an instant. Even if a wound was really left behind, the bleeding would very quickly stop and scab over. This was a unique trait that he had obtained from the Divine Stone. He had once been the strongest heavenly venerate, so how could it possibly have no benefit at all? Contrary to everyone's expectations, Ling Han was especially durable. Several hundred moves had already passed, and he could still keep up a defensive and an offensive. He wasn't the first to collapse. On the other hand, Sima Rong and the giant python encountered the biggest problem. Their power was close to exhaustion. It couldn't be helped. Their power was stored in their meridians, and only when the sun first rose would they be able to sense the mystical power of heaven and earth. When they cultivated, they would either replenish their energy, or use the spirit-gathering formation to extract the power of the jade seeds. But now, both of them could not do that. This power could only be unleashed, and there was no replenishment, so naturally, the more they fought, the less it would become. In the end, they would be exhausted. Ling Han, on the other hand, was a fresh force, and his meridians had been opened wide enough, so he could store even more power than a 10 meridians. Then, he would definitely be able to last longer than Sima Rong and the giant python. Sima Rong could not believe it. He would actually be defeated in this manner? He couldn't accept this. A king tier of 10 meridians was actually going to lose to a 9 meridians. No matter what the reason was, this was a great humiliation, and he would be laughed at to death. Scram! Ling Han threw a heavy punch. The advantage of the 4 directional fists was that they could allow power to be steadily unleashed without any fluctuations in force. Pung! Sima Rong was instantly sent flying. After using all his power, he was actually not much stronger than an ordinary person. Meanwhile, Ling Han charged toward the giant python. Pung pung pung! He threw 19 consecutive punches. Although these weren't overlapping layers of power, the speed of his punches was fast enough. Each punch landed on about the same spot, and the power of his punches wasn't much weaker than that. After 19 punches, the giant python's head was forcefully blown apart by Ling Han. Chapter 3143 A warship appears. Chapter 3143 A warship appears. 3143 A warship appears. A creature like the python was very active. Even if it had lost its head, it did not die immediately. Instead, it churned on the ground, sending sand and rocks flying. However, the result was already out. The person who had killed the giant python was Ling Han. Who could have imagined this before? Sima Rong was panting heavily, and the gaze he directed at Ling Han was filled with fury and confusion. How could a 9 meridians be so strong? Ha ha! Sun Jianfang laughed loudly. Ling Han had really done him proud this time, suppressing his peers and becoming number 1. Humph, he merely took advantage of the situation, Chao Tsung said coldly, his face filled with displeasure. Although he didn't know how Sima Rong had broken through to 10 meridians, nor did he know where he had learnt the 4 overlapping layers of power from, this was a person of Blue Feather City. Sima Rong had lost, so he was also embarrassed. A 9 meridians fighting against the 10 meridians. If they win, what else is there to say? Sun Jianfang slanted a sideways glance at Chao Kong. Why don't we wait until Ling Han advances into the 10 meridians and have them fight again? These words rendered Chao Tsung speechless. This was because once Ling Han reached the 10 meridians, his power would definitely be able to suppress Sima Rong. At the same time, he would also be able to release his power, which eliminated his greatest weakness. Even if Sima Rong had 4 overlapping layers of power, it would probably be very difficult for him to win. After all, under the crushing pressure of absolute power, even with 4 overlapping layers of power, he would still be defeated. A loss is a loss. Everyone, this volcanic fruit belongs to our ancient Tao sect. There's no problem, right? Sun Jianfang chuckled. All the elders were speechless. They were all people who cared about their pride, so how could they take back their own words? Moreover, the ones who truly made the decisions were the Supreme King tiers of 12 meridians. They themselves didn't need the volcanic fruit, so at most, they would only feel some discomfort and resentment, but wouldn't feel the pain directly. Let's go! Ji Yuanlong waved his hand. He had the worst temper, and always liked to argue with others, but those with explosive tempers were also straightforward. Everyone shook their heads, preparing to leave. They faltered for a moment before raising their heads to look at the sky. A colossal shadow cast down, and a massive ship appeared in the skies. It was completely black in color, and looked like a metallic monster. What was this thing? The older generation had all seen planes with their own eyes, and the younger generation had also seen the information of flying vessels on the optical computer, and knew that there was something that could fly in the air without relying on wings. But the problem here was, there was no flying machine that could match this one in the skies. However, aside from those with propellers, there were no other flying devices that could fly at such a slow speed. In fact, they could even hover in midair. Furthermore, no one had seen anything resembling propellers on this battleship. This battleship wasn't small. It was about 90 meters long, and even if placed in water, it was a large ship. As it floated in midair, it cast a huge shadow. There was an emblem at the bow of the ship, and there was a 5-clawed golden dragon drawn on it. It was vivid and lifelike, as if it could come to life. Everyone was stunned. Ling Han was also stunned, because wasn't this the warship of the Genesis world? It could be driven by formations, and could be fast or slow, and could move or be still. In this world, this was something that definitely should not have appeared. Could it be that this had been dug out from an ancient site of the civilization of the last era? Ling Han couldn't confirm whether this was dug out from the ground or created after obtaining an ancient technique, but he definitely couldn't underestimate it, because there were black cannon muzzles protruding from the body of the ship, giving him an extremely terrifying feeling of threat. This battleship slowly descended amidst everyone's shock. Thankfully, this mountain peak was big enough. Otherwise, if it was any other mountain peak, it really might not be able to accommodate it. After the warship landed, a floating ladder was thrown down from the bow of the ship, and people gradually walked down from it. There were only 10 people in total, and their leader was a woman who looked to be only in her mid-20s. She was in the prime of her life, and her skin was so delicate that it looked like water could drip from it. Even if she was only covered with her hands, neck and face exposed, she still had a kind of captivating beauty. She was dressed in a dark green tight-fitting outfit, completely outlining her voluptuous figure, especially her shapely bottom, over which the leather material was tightly stretched. The shape was completely obvious, as if she was a ripe peach. She showed off her alluring grace, but the 9 men behind her looked straight ahead, as if the person walking in front of them was not a woman at all. Sima Rong pays his respects to the Captain Lien. Sima Rong rushed out, kneeling on one knee. Seeing this scene, all the higher-ups were stunned. As a 10 Meridian King Tyr, he actually knelt down to pay his respects? King Tyrs naturally had the pride of King Tyrs. How could they be so humble and subservient? Chao Tsung's expression darkened. To a certain extent, a King Tyr of 10 Meridians could already represent a force. Now that Sima Rong had knelt down in front of others, it was equivalent to kneeling down together with the pride of Blue Feather City, so how could he not be angered? Sima Rong, what are you doing? He asked harshly. However, Sima Rong ignored him completely, and continued to kneel steadily. The beauty in dark green attire glanced at Chao Tsung, parted her bright red lips, and said, "To dare make a ruckus in front of me, what should the offender be punished with?" 30 slaps, a man behind her said. "Execute the punishment," the beauty in black said calmly. "Yes." The man immediately walked out. Though he had been standing behind the beauty in black just now, like a bodyguard, the moment he stepped out, he was exuding a powerful aura, as if he had become a completely different person. Chao Tsung's expression involuntarily changed slightly. This man was only in his 30s, but the feeling he gave off was filled with pressure. Could it be that this person was also a top-notch King Tyr of 12 Meridians? The problem was that this man was only in his 30s, so how could he possibly be at 12 Meridians? "Old geezer, you've already lived for so long, yet you still don't know how to control your mouth," the man said coldly. With a bounce, he charged over. Boom, he threw a punch, and instantly, a series of sonic booms rang out. However, the speed at which the sonic booms spread couldn't compare to his punch. He had just raised his hand, when his fist had already landed in front of Chao Kong. Chao Tsung humphed, and raised his right hand, blocking this punch. Ping! The two of them clashed in close-quarter combat, but did not come into a solid contact. Instead, they stopped about 3 feet apart, as if there was an invisible wall between them that was blocking the both of them. Power was released. This was a battle between King Tyrs. Boom! The force reverberated, and the two of them took a few steps back at the same time. This time, the expressions of Sun Jianfang and the others all became solemn. In this blow, though Chao Tsung was not at a disadvantage, he similarly did not have the upper hand either. This man was actually at 12 Meridians. How was this possible? Previously, the appearance of Sima Rong, a 10 Meridians, was already enough to stun everyone to the point of disbelief. Now, another 30-year-old 12 Meridians elite had appeared? Heavens, what was wrong with this world? Desolate natives are indeed weak. The man laughed loudly, and attacked again. This time, he was not just throwing a casual punch. Instead, multiple layers of light condensed on his fist. Chapter 3144 Absolute Strength. Chapter 3144 Absolute Strength. 3144 Strength. 5 overlapping layers of power! Ji Yuanlong's eyes lit up, and his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Just now, when Sima Rong used the 4 overlapping layers of power, it was already enough to make people drop their glasses in shock, and now here was another person that could use 5 overlapping layers of power? A 30-year-old 12 meridians and 5 overlapping layers of power added together created too much of an impact. Most importantly, this guy that Sun Jianfang and the others thought was freakish was actually just a subordinate of the beauty in black clothing. This was undoubtedly even more unacceptable. They could only hope that this man had only submitted to the woman in black because he coveted her beauty. Otherwise, it would be unbelievable. Chao Tsung charged forwards with all his might, but the raw power of both sides was more or less equal. However, one could only fire out 3 overlapping layers of power, while the other could fire out 5 overlapping layers of power. The gap between them was naturally extremely wide. To make an unsuitable analogy, this was equivalent to 5 people fighting 3 people, and each person's strength was more or less equal. Then who would win and who would lose? Chao Tsung was soon at a disadvantage. Under the crushing pressure of his opponent's 5 overlapping layers of power, he struggled to hold on, completely unable to fight back. Of course, it wasn't that he didn't have a chance to turn the tables. This was because under the weight of the 5 overlapping layers of power, his opponent's power would definitely be exhausted far more than his. Thus, as long as he could hold on until his opponent's power was exhausted, he would be able to obtain victory easily. But the problem was, he could not hold on for that long. His opponent's attacks were endless, like mercury dripping onto the ground, wave after wave, making him feel like he could collapse at any moment. "Brother Chao, I'll help you!" Meng Ruining roared as he joined the battle. They had known each other since the beginning of the great upheaval of heaven and earth. Afterwards, though they had all established their own forces, they were not too far apart from each other. They would also have some contact with each other. If they encountered a powerful demonic beast that started a massive assault of demonic beasts, they would even help each other. Thus, now that an unfamiliar force had come, it was clear that they were being stepped on, so they naturally had to unite against a common enemy. "Wan Feng, you go," the woman in black robes said calmly. "Yes, Banner Lord." Behind her, another man walked out and approached Meng Ruining. Pun pun pun. The moment they exchanged blows, everyone was once again shocked. This man who looked to be only in his 30s was shockingly a top-notch king tier of 12 meridians. Moreover, he had also grasped 5 overlapping layers of power. He threw punch after punch, and Meng Ruining was completely at a disadvantage in just a single exchange. This caused Ji Yuanlong, the old woman, and the others who were about to step forward to stop. Could it be that the 9 people behind this woman were all elites of 12 meridians, and each of them could fire out 5 overlapping layers of power? This kind of lineup was too terrifying. It was enough to sweep aside any force. "Don't meddle in other people's business," the woman in black said calmly. With a wave of her slender hand, a group of crossbowmen appeared from the ship, aiming their eerie crossbows at everyone. Being pointed at by these crossbows, everyone felt a strong chill, and were even more confused. It should be known that when one had reached 12 meridians, his reaction speed was extremely sharp. He was unafraid of even firearms, because he could send a bullet flying with a single punch. However, being targeted by these crossbows, these elites felt even worse than being targeted by guns. No one dared to act rashly. Even Old Venom was well behaved. At first, he had wanted to show off and spread poison. No one helped, and Chao Tsung was very quickly defeated. He was slapped by that man, causing his face to flush red, and he even spat out blood. He was the lord of a city, and had several thousand people under his command. Moreover, He was standing at the peak of martial arts, yet now, he was being pressed onto the ground and slapped by an elite of the same cultivation level. How could he accept this? After that man had slapped Chao Tsongxing 30 times, he immediately retreated, and stood behind the woman in black like a servant. On the other side, after Wang Feng sent Meng Ruining flying with a palm strike, he also retreated. He was only stopping Meng Ruining from helping. Chao Tsong spat out blood continuously. This was not because he had been severely injured, but rather because he had been angered. Only then did the woman in black look towards Sima Rong and wave her hand, saying, "Rise." "Thank you, Banner Lord." Sima Rong stood up. Though he had been kneeling for so long, there was not the slightest bit of displeasure on his face. Everyone was both curious and stunned. What kind of background did this woman have, that she could command so many 12 Meridians king tiers, and also make Sima Rong abandon even his pride as a king tier? "I am Lian Xuerong, the Banner Lord of the Xianqing Banner of Hujiu City of the Dark North Nation," the woman in black clothing said. "I have come south this time to integrate all of you under the command of our Dark North Nation." Sun Jianfang and the others all sneered. They were all overlords of a region, so how could they tolerate being under someone else's command? Moreover, this wasn't a recruitment by the Dark North Nation. Instead, it was a recruitment by Hujiu City that was under its rule. In fact, it wasn't even the city lord who had personally come, but rather a banner lord. This was underestimating them too much, wasn't it? Lian Xuerong's eyes swept over them. "Don't think that being under the rule of our Dark North Nation is an embarrassing matter. Humph, if it was not for the fact that His Imperial Majesty has the heart to bring good fortune to the whole world, who would be willing to set foot in such a desolate land?" Just listen to what she was saying. Others were forced to surrender, and she even looked disdainful that she was even bothering with them. This really made them feel uncomfortable. "I'll give you 10 minutes to consider." Lian Xuerong waved her hand, and looked at Sima Rong. "Did you find any good seedlings?" Sima Rong immediately swept a glance at Ling Han out of the corner of his eye, but he quickly withdrew it, and said, "In reply to Banner Lord, in the desolate plains, it is difficult to find anyone outstanding." Lian Xuerong nodded slowly. This place was too remote, and martial arts was still in its budding stage. A 12 Meridians was actually able to establish their own sect? What a huge joke. There were no outstanding talents here, so it was naturally not strange. Their conversation wasn't loud, so Sun Jianfang and the others didn't hear it. They only thought that Sima Rong was snitching about something. No wonder this person could break through to 10 Meridians at 24 to 25 years old. Just look at him. The people that were casually sent out were all king tiers of 12 Meridians, and they were only in their 30s. What ancient inheritance had this Dark North Nation obtained? Was there a special method that could allow one to advance into 10 Meridians, or perhaps even higher? "Banner Lord, there is a volcanic fruit under this pool. This subordinate has deliberately prepared it to you," Sima Rong continued. "Volcanic fruit?" Lian Xuerong smiled faintly. "Although it's not all that valuable, it can still be considered treasured fruit. Wang Feng, go and check on the fruit. If it is right, pluck it." Wang Feng took a step forward and was just about to leap into the pool. However, Ling Han stepped forward and said, "Wait. Brat, do you have any objections?" Wang Feng scoffed. He naturally wouldn't take anyone here seriously. "Yes." Ling Han nodded. "This volcanic fruit is mine." "How so?" Wang Feng asked with a smile. "Did you plant this?" Ling Han pointed at the python in the distance and said, "This is the demonic beast guarding the treasured fruit. I killed it, so this treasured fruit should belong to me." "Oh?" Wang Feng looked surprised. With his experience, he only had to look at the size of that giant python to know that it was a 10 Meridians demonic beast. This brat in front of him, could he be a 10 Meridians? Chapter 3145 Strong Support. Chapter 3145 Strong Support. 3145 Strong Support. In this remote and desolate place, a 10 Meridians elite that looked to be in his 20s could actually appear? How was this possible? Young man, you're really blowing your own trumpet. Wang Feng laughed loudly. Naturally, he didn't believe him at all. Ling Han smiled faintly. Then ask around, who was the one who had killed this python? Wang Feng faltered for a moment. This brat was so calm and composed. Could it be that he was really the one who had killed it? Bullsh! Sima Rong hurriedly jumped out. It was clearly me that had exhausted this demonic snake, and that was why you had the advantage. He knew what mission Lian Xuerong had, so he definitely couldn't let her know about Ling Han's freakish natural talent in cultivation. Otherwise, this brat would easily surpass him. This was something he definitely didn't want to see. Such a vile character? Lian Xuerong spoke up. The gaze she directed at Ling Han was filled with disdain. Milady, this is the truth, Sun Jianfang said. It was clear that there were dangerous arrows aimed at him, but he was still willing to support Ling Han. Ling Han looked at the old geezer, and couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. It was easy to add icing on the cake, but it was difficult to send coal in the snow. Only at this moment would one be able to see who was the person who truly treated him well. Lian Xuerong scoffed, and said, Little Qi, step out. Yes, Banner Lord. A young man somersaulted, and leaped down from the battleship. Ping! This battleship was over 30 meters tall, and the force of his descent was still a little shocking, shaking the ground slightly. This could only be considered a youth. He looked to be 16 or 17 years old, at most, and looked a little quirky in personality. You are 10 Meridians. Go and fight him, Lian Xuerong said. Yes. This young man bowed slightly towards Lian Xuerong, then walked towards Ling Han. What, this young man was actually 10 Meridians? Everyone was dumbfounded. If that was really the case, then this dark north nation was too terrifying, wasn't it? Originally, Gu Tang, Nie Huayun, and the others were still conflicted and unwilling to live under someone else's power. But if they could open the door to the 12 Meridians, they would all be tempted. There was only one volcanic fruit, so how could it be divided among them? My name is Zhao Qi. The young man smiled at Ling Han. You have to be careful. I will go all out. If you are boasting, you would only be killed by me. Xiao, he rushed out, and shot out a palm strike, pressing down on Ling Han. As expected, his cultivation level was 10 meridians. Before his palm reached him, an invisible force had already reached him. Ling Han threw a punch. Pun! The force of his punch met the youth's attack, and like the blade of a saber, forcefully split apart the youth's force, which then swept past on either side of him. Yi? En? Yeah? Lian Xuerong, Wang Feng, and the others all exclaimed in shock. With such a clash, they naturally could see very clearly that Ling Han's power had indeed reached 10 meridians. Tisk, he's clearly only a 9 meridians elite, still unable to release his full power. However, his power has already reached the peak stage of 10 meridians. This is impressive enough. If he was in our city, he would probably be able to enter into the top 10, right? Such a prodigy can actually appear in such a remote place. How rare! Wang Feng and the others whispered among themselves. In front of Lian Xuerong, they didn't dare to be impudent at all. It was as if this wasn't a seductive beauty with bone-deep beauty, but rather a powerful beast of the primitive age. Lian Xuerong also nodded slightly. This kind of young man was truly outstanding, and could be called a prodigy. Pun pun pun! Zhao Qi didn't receive any new commands from Lian Xuerong, so he naturally wouldn't step back. He dashed forward like a panther, launching fierce attacks at Ling Han. His attacks were erratic and unpredictable, and he could attack from all kinds of tricky angles. It was almost impossible to defend against. Ling Han mainly focused on defense. A 9 meridians was really at too much of a disadvantage against the 10 meridians. Thankfully, a 10 meridians could only release their power for around 3 feet or so. In other words, Zhao Qi had to be very close to him to be able to launch a threatening attack. In this way, it also gave Ling Han the space to counterattack. It was only 3 feet. His legs exploded with full power, and he could rapidly approach, which similarly posed a great threat to Zhao Qi. The 9 Meridians were truly battling against the 10 Meridians. It wasn't long before the two of them had already exchanged several dozen blows. Lian Xiaorong withdrew her gaze and looked at Sun Jianfang and the others. 10 minutes is up. What's your choice? We are willing to surrender. Gu Tang, Higuan, and the other elders immediately bowed. It was not just these few elders from the ancient Dao sect. The Divine Wind sect, Blue Feather City, Netherworld faction, and so on had all chosen to surrender, all those that were not 12 Meridians. If they followed this Dark North nation, it seemed like their future would be bright. A 10 Meridians in his teens, a 12 Meridians in his 30s, this was practically a myth. Moreover, they were too strong. For example, Chao Tsong and Meng Ruining were both 12 Meridians, but in a one-on-one situation, they were completely no match. Thus, it was better to be a smart person and go with the flow. What decision have you all made? Lian Xiaorong looked towards Sun Jianfang, Ji Yuanlong, and the few others. Sun Jianfang sighed internally. He had operated the ancient Dao sect for close to 100 years, yet he was actually no match for one word from Lian Xiaorong. This made him feel slightly disheartened. His lifespan was nearing its end, so there was actually nothing he couldn't let go of. However, the ancient Dao sect was connected to his blood and sweat, and he hoped that it could become even better in the future. That was why he held on to power and refused to let go. It was only when Ling Han appeared that he finally found someone he thought could help him shoulder his burden. He planned to step down after Ling Han advanced into 10 Meridians. Unexpectedly, the change came so quickly. If I don't surrender? Sun Jianfang asked. All lands under the heavens belong to the Emperor, Lian Xiaorong said calmly. The meaning of these words was very clear. If Sun Jianfang still wanted to stay in the ancient Dao sect, he would definitely have to submit to the rule of the Dark North nation. In front of royal authority, no one could be an exception. Otherwise, you can leave. If you are not a citizen of the Dark North nation, then you naturally do not have to abide by the laws of the Dark North nation. I would like to spar a few moves with Banner Lord Lian. Sun Jianfang looked towards Lian Xiaorong, fighting spirit blazing in his eyes. Wang Feng. Lian Xiaorong answered calmly. Yes, Banner Lord. Wang Feng immediately stepped out. If you want to fight with my Banner Lord, you have to get through me first. Old Venom, Meng Ruining, and the other 12 Meridians elites all looked at Sun Jianfang. They naturally didn't want to surrender the force that they had operated for so many years, but in front of absolute strength, what could they do? Sun Jianfang smiled faintly. You're no match for me. Ha, shameless boasting! Wang Feng shouted loudly, and charged towards Sun Jianfang. His strength had reached 50,000 kilograms, and he burst out with his full strength. As he rushed over, it was as if he was a herd of wild bulls running madly. Sun Jianfang stood with his hands clasped behind his back. When Wang Feng was about 15 meters away from him, he waved his hand. Go! Wang Feng also roared loudly. As he shot out a punch, the 5 overlapping layers of power were superimposed. Visibly, even the air itself was rippling, as if it was wrinkling. He pushed this powerful force onwards. 12 Meridians could release their power to about 6 meters, so the present distance was still a little short of that. Boom! Sun Jianfang shot out a palm strike, and Wang Feng was sent flying. Chapter 3146 3146 Amongst the strong, there will always be those who are stronger. Chapter 3146 3146 Amongst the strong, there will always be those who are stronger. 3146 Amongst the strong, there will always be those who are stronger. What? Wang Feng's strength had already been proven. He was a supreme king tier of 12 meridians, and he had even cultivated 5 overlapping layers of power. Logically speaking, if one could send him flying, it would have to be 12 meridians as well, who had cultivated 6 overlapping layers of power, or even more. Sun Jianfang was undoubtedly at 12 meridians. In other words, he had cultivated 6 or 7 overlapping layers of power? What ancient secret technique had he obtained? Sun Jianfang crossed his arms behind his back and said, "Now, do I have the right to ask for some guidance?" As the mountain winds blew, his robes fluttered, and he had an indescribable air of ease. Even if he was facing a group of powerful enemies, and even if he was targeted by terrifying arrows, so what? Cultivators were unyielding. Ji Yuanlong and the other 12 Meridians King Tiers all felt admiration from the bottom of their hearts. They knew that a large part of the reason why Sun Jianfang dared to step out like this was because he did not have much lifespan left. At most, he could live for another 10 years. Hence, he was willing to go all out, and did not hesitate to have a vigorous battle to end his legendary life in glory. However, it was the same for them, but none of them dared to step out. In comparison, Sun Jianfang stood out. "Ah!" Wang Feng roared in fury as he charged back from the distance. This attack caused blood to seep from the corners of his lips, but it seemed to have incited his vicious nature, and his face was filled with killing intent. "Step back!" Lian Xuerong's eyes lit up. "You are no match for him." "Captain?" Wang Feng was unwilling to give up. Although he had suffered a loss in a single strike, he believed that he could still win with his superior technique. "En?" Lian Xuerong's beautiful eyes glared, and a murderous aura spread out. "Yes." Wang Feng obediently stepped aside. A dignified 12 Meridians Supreme King Tier actually didn't have much of a temper. This woman, just how strong was she? Lian Xuerong looked at Sun Jianfang, nodded, and showed an expression of approval. "In this desolate land, you can actually rely on your own efforts to advance into the blood transformation tier. It's really not easy." When these words fell, everyone was shocked. What, Sun Jianfang had already stepped into another cultivation level? No wonder he could send Wang Feng flying with a single palm strike. If he had advanced into a new major tier, then what would it matter if his opponent was a king tier of 12 meridians? Blood transformation tier? Sun Jianfang also revealed a blank expression, as if he didn't understand at all. Lian Xuerong shook her head, and said, "As expected, you only explored on your own, and opened the door to the next cultivation level. However, you don't understand, and have gone through who knows how many twists and turns in the process of cultivation. You must have suffered countless hidden injuries, and suffered great losses." She paused for a moment before continuing. "Others can obtain an additional 30 years or so of lifespan after reaching the blood transformation tier. However, you've suffered far too many losses. At most, you can only obtain a lifespan of 10 years. Sun Jianfang's expression tensed up at first, then he revealed a carefree expression. "Who can avoid death when they're alive? I've been unhindered all my life and founded the ancient Tao sect, and relied on my own abilities to advance to a new cultivation level. What regrets would I have even if I die?" His name was destined to remain in the annals of history, and become a legend on the path of martial arts. It was already enough for him to have reached this point in his life. "Oh, you think your accomplishments are very extraordinary?" Lian Xuerong smiled faintly. "Old man, you have been a frog at the bottom of a well for too long." She leaped out, as agile as a cheetah, and pressed her palm down on Sun Jianfang. Pun! She was still extremely far away, yet her power had already reached him. Sun Jianfang hurriedly raised his fist to parry. This was the 4 directional fists. In this exchange of blows, the two of them were separated by at least 15 meters, but the force had already clashed fiercely, as if it had solidified. Sun Jianfang's figure swayed, and he couldn't help but take a few steps back. Then, he trembled again, and took another 10 steps back. After stopping, he took another 10 steps back, and then another 10 steps back. In this manner, he took more than 100 steps back before finally stopping. Everyone was transfixed with shock. Fuck! This woman's strength was far too heaven-defying. Sun Jianfang was already awesome enough, sending Wang Feng, who was a 12 meridians, flying with a single slap. However, faced with this woman, he retreated more than 100 steps with a single strike. Moreover, he stopped, retreated, and stopped again. What did this signify? Lian Xuerong's attack not only crushed Sun Jianfang in terms of power, but also formed a dozen overlapping layers of power, and only then could she have suppressed Sun Jianfang in waves. She was too strong. She alone was enough to sweep aside all opposition in the world. No wonder so many 12 Meridians elites were willing to submit to her. He Guan, Gu Tang, and the others, on the other hand, became energetic, raising their heads and puffing out their chests. As the saying went, smart birds would choose a tree to perch on. They were the smart people here, and had made the most correct choice. Moreover, if a banner lord was already so awesome, then how strong would the lord of Hujiu City be? And how strong would the sovereign of the Black North Nation be? Only with such a powerful backer would there be boundless brilliance. Just listen, what did Lian Xuerong say just now? If one advanced to the blood transformation tier, they would be able to obtain an additional 30 years of lifespan. That was 30 years. Especially for Ji Yuanlong and the others, they were all restless. Which of them wasn't nearing the limit of their lifespan? It was possible that they would sleep at night, and not be able to get up the next day. Who didn't want to live for a few more years? Sun Jianfang's expression changed drastically. He had never imagined that he, who had pushed open the door to a new cultivation level, would be inferior to a woman in her 20s. This dark North Nation or whatnot was a little too powerful, wasn't it? Old man, in the desolate plains you managed to step into the blood transformation tier with your own exploration. This is truly extraordinary. Hence, I am willing to give you a chance. Join our empire, and not only will I heal the life force that you have lost, I can even help you step into a higher cultivation level. Lian Xuerong said calmly. Was there a higher cultivation level than the blood transformation tier? Everyone's hearts thumped wildly. This was really a temptation that could not be refused. Stronger strength, more lifespan, what better choice could a cultivator make than this? Sun Jianfang sighed. Previously, he had thought of himself as a legend, but hearing Lian Xuerong's words, this little achievement of his was really nothing. Just how many blood transformation tier elites were there in their city? His heart had already wavered. However, he still couldn't just discard his pride, so he stood there without saying anything. Meng Renning walked over and said, "Big brother Sun, come on. Water naturally flows downhill, and we're all naturally aiming for greater heights." He had already made up his mind. Moreover, with the terrifying abilities of Lian Xuerong and the others, there was actually no need for them to be so polite. They could completely force their way through, and who would be able to stop them? With this thought, the conflict and grievance in his heart naturally decreased slightly. Sun Jianfang nodded. He looked at Lian Xuerong and said, "I can surrender, but there's one thing that has to be made clear. That demonic snake was indeed killed by one of our disciples." "I believe you," Lian Xuerong said, glancing at Sima Rong. Sima Rong's body instantly trembled, and he couldn't help but shiver. Although Lian Xuerong still hadn't reprimanded him yet, he knew that this banner lord couldn't tolerate faults. He actually dared to deceive her, so he definitely wouldn't have a good ending. Chapter 3147 3147 Appreciation. Chapter 3147 3147 Appreciation. 3147 Appreciation. The outcome of the battle here was already set in stone, but on the other side, there was still a fierce battle raging on. Although Zhao Qi was only 16 or 17 years old, his battle experience was extremely abundant. Moreover, he could release his power, and with the compounding of the 5 overlapping layers of power, his battle prowess was incredibly powerful. Ling Han mainly focused on defense, waiting for an opportunity to counterattack, and his true motive was to wait until Zhao Qi had used up all his power. At that time, it would be him blowing the horn to signal the beginning of his counterattack. Zhao Qi was young and rash, so how could he compare to Ling Han, a veteran who had fought countless battles in the Genesis world? If the 10 Meridians went all out, they would only be able to battle for about 2 hours, and with the extravagant use of 5 overlapping layers of power, this had to be further divided into 5. Thus, after half an hour, Zhao Qi's power began to decline. His stamina was astonishing, and his breathing wasn't heavy. However, the mystical power in his body had been expended too much, and even the distance he could release it over had shrunk to about a foot. That's all? Ling Han released a battle cry, and counterattacked with all his might. Pun pun pun! He aggressively charged forward. In just 3 punches and 2 kicks, Zhao Qi was sent flying. And this was still because he had not used the demonic monkey fists. Otherwise, he would have long since defeated his opponent. It was necessary to hide one's strength. Whether it was the demonic monkey fists or the brother monkey cultivation technique, they were both too important. Lian Xuerong opened her mouth and said, "Little Qi, come back." Zhao Qi got up and rubbed his chest, showing a pained expression. He obediently walked back, and there was no hatred in the gaze he directed at Ling Han. Instead, it was filled with admiration. Not only him, but even Wang Feng and the others were no exception. Warriors like them had the greatest admiration for those who were truly good at fighting. Ling Han had defeated Zhao Qi, a 10 Meridians elite, with his cultivation level of 9 Meridians. In their eyes, he was definitely even more astonishing than Sun Jianfang, who had cultivated to the blood transformation tier. After all, if it was in Huju City, although there weren't blood transformation tier elites all over the city, there were still many of them. However, for a 9 Meridians to defeat a 10 Meridians? There were pitifully few, and they definitely could be ranked in the top 10. Lian Xuerong nodded at Ling Han and said, "Now, I believe that you were the one who killed that python. However, I didn't make a promise with you that whoever kills this python will have the volcanic fruit." Ling Han frowned upon hearing this. What did this woman mean? "I still have an empty position of deputy captain here. Are you willing to work for me?" Lian Xuerong spoke up. When these words fell, even Wang Feng and the others were surprised. There were a total of 10 teams under the Xianqing banner, and every team had a captain, followed by a deputy captain. Wang Feng and the elites of 12 Meridians were all captains. However, if one wanted to become the deputy captain, they would have to be in 11 Meridians, at the very least. Ling Han hadn't even advanced to the 10 Meridians yet. Even if he had the ability of a 10 Meridians, in the Xianqing banner, he really couldn't be considered an elite. This time, he had been exceptionally promoted. However, Lian Xuerong's rule was extremely strict, so Wang Feng and the others didn't dare to say anything. Meanwhile, He Guan and the others looked jealous. Fuck, they had long since chosen their side, but it seemed like they weren't even qualified to join the Xianqing banner. Ling Han, on the other hand, only went through a fight, and he had become the deputy captain. Didn't this mean that seniors like them would have to submit to Ling Han? They were naturally all defiant and displeased. Thoughts streaked through Ling Han's mind. If he stayed in the ancient Tao sect, his cultivation would come to an end at the 12 Meridians. Sun Jianfan had explored for so many years before finally advancing into the blood transformation tier, and he had paid a huge price in this process. Even if his talent was outstanding, and the time he needed to become a blood transformation tier was far less than Sun Jianfang, without anyone to guide him, this time would still be very long. Following the path of their predecessors and walking out a path for themselves were two completely different things. Moreover, the Dark North nation seemed to have already walked very far on the path of martial arts. For example, if a banner lord was a blood transformation tier elite, then wouldn't the city lord have to be a level higher, and what cultivation level did the emperor have? The ancient Tao sect was really too small. The so-called prodigy was only someone like Li Changdan. There was no meaning to stepping on him. Ling Han still wanted to study formations and alchemy. It seemed like this could only be realized if he went to the Dark North nation. He came to a decision, clasped his hands and said, "Many thanks to Banner Lord for your kind offer." Humph! His attitude incited the displeasure of Wang Feng and the others. When captains like them saw Lian Xuerong, they even had to half kneel down to pay their respects. And you just clasped your hands in greeting? You really think too highly of yourself, don't you? Lian Xuerong didn't care. She ran her fingers through her silky hair. This kind of young man with personality was what she admired more, what was the point of being too accommodating and servile? However, her interest was also to wear down the thorns in these young people's personalities, so that they would listen obediently. "I'll bestow this volcanic fruit on you. Go and retrieve it yourself," she said lazily. Lien Xuerong okayed towards the masses again. "I will give you a month's time to deal with trivial matters. After a month, your forces will come under the territory of the Dark North Nation, and the flag of the Dark North Nation will be planted, worshipping my master as His Majesty." "Understood," Ji Yuanlong and the others replied with a bow. This was a great elite of the blood transformation tier. Aside from Sun Jianfang, who could just barely be considered as an equal, the others could only obey. Another group of people jumped down from the battleship. Each force would be assigned one person, and they would coordinate the process of submitting. After all, submitting to the Dark North Nation wasn't something as simple as just raising a flag. "Old man, let's discuss together," Lien Xuerong said to Sun Jianfang with a smile, appearing very polite. Even in Huju City, a blood transformation tier cultivator could be called an elite cultivator. Moreover, Sun Jianfang had broken through to this cultivation level by himself. There was nothing to be said about his talent and determination. Thus, she gave him a lot of face. If he could survive the loss of life force which resulted in the depletion of his lifespan, perhaps he would have even greater potential for development in the future. Sun Jianfang nodded. She admired Ling Han, which made him feel very pleased. He had no children, and he was already feeling slightly like he was treating Ling Han as his descendant. "Please!" He also became polite. The two of them boarded the battleship to discuss martial arts, while He Guan, Gu Tang and the others brought a Xianqing banner warrior back to ancient Tao sect to deal with the specific matters of surrender and submission. "Brother!" Wang Feng and the others all gathered around him. It was as if they had seen a monster, and they all stared at Ling Han. It's over, you're really done for." "That's right. There isn't a man that our banner lord admires that has come out unscathed. Sai, you should pray for good fortune." Ling Han laughed in spite of himself. "Banner Lord Lien is that terrifying? How could she not be?" a bald man said. "Even though our banner lord is so dazzlingly beautiful and charming, she's actually as cold as ice in her bones. She's a demon. In the past, there was a captain who took advantage of the fact that he was a relative of the city lord, and took advantage of his drunken mood to speak cheekily to the banner lord, and guess what happened in the end? His mouth was forcibly smashed, and his lower half had also been sliced off. He ended up being neither male nor female." Ling Han said. "That person probably brought this upon himself. You don't understand. Our banner lord Lien is a two-faced person. Right now, she's as cold as a block of ice, but after a few days she can be as passionate as fire and melt you down. However, if you dare to show even the slightest bit of, you understand. Then, just wait to be taught a lesson," Wang Feng said with lingering fear. Chapter 3148 Dark North Nation. Chapter 3148 Dark North Nation. 3148 Dark North Nation. Ling Han looked at these 9 people and asked, "Have you all suffered like that before?" Sigh. The 12 Meridians King Tiers all sighed. "Who would not times when they had misbehaved?" a large man in green said. It was no wonder that when these people had followed Lien Xuerong off the battleship, they were all as obedient as children. As it turned out, they had all been harshly taught a lesson, leaving behind a strong psychological scar on them. He really couldn't tell that this aloof woman had a side to her that was as beautiful as peach flowers. "Additionally, welcome, brother, to join our Xianqing banner." Wang Feng opened his arms to Ling Han and hugged him tightly. The others all stepped forward to embrace Ling Han. They then introduced themselves. These people were actually very simple and sincere, causing Ling Han to slowly change his mindset. Originally, he had hated these people very much. As for Sima Rong, he was in a miserable state. Though Lien Xuerong didn't reprimand him, everyone knew that their banner lord hated being deceived the most. She didn't flare up now because Lien Xuerong held Sun Jianfang in high regard and could not spare the time to punish him now. In the first place, the warriors all looked down on bootlickers like Sima Rong. Naturally, no one wanted to plead on his behalf. They only treated him as empty air, just passing him by, and did not even cast a second look at him. Sima Rong was despondent. He had been assigned a mission when he returned to Blue Feather City this time, acting as a pawn and scout, mainly to find out about the outstanding talents of the various forces. And what happened in the end? There was obviously a super genius like Ling Han, but because of his jealousy, he had almost been buried. How could Lien Xuerong spare him? Flee. He thought to himself that nothing good would happen if he stayed, and he was already a king tier of 10 Meridians, so where couldn't he go? However, just as he was about to descend the mountain, he saw the bald man block his path with a grin. Where do you think you're going? This was an elite of 12 Meridians. Sima Rong flopped onto the ground. He couldn't run away even if he wanted to, so he could only wait for punishment in fear. Ling Han didn't immediately dive into the pool. The water was still filled with strong poison, and even a 10 Meridians demonic beast couldn't withstand it. If he jumped in like this, it was very likely that he wouldn't be able to come out again. It would be better to wait. In any case, the battleship would only be started a month later, and returned to Huju City. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ling Han asked Wang Feng and the others for guidance, and gained a good understanding of the Dark North Nation. The Dark North Nation originated from the extreme north of the celestial sea planet. After the drastic changes in heaven and earth, it rapidly rose up, and soon swept aside all opposition, continuously expanding its territory. Why was the ancient Tao sect completely unaware of the existence of such a colossal force? It was very simple, because after the great change of heaven and earth, the wilderness was filled with demonic beasts, and the communication devices were also broken. People could not walk too far, and what they knew and heard was limited. It was only now that the expansion of the Dark North Nation had reached them that they suddenly realized that there was actually such an incomparably powerful force outside. The Emperor of the Dark North Nation was surnamed Qin, but no one knew his name. This was an honorific, and ordinary people were not qualified to know. And what cultivation level the Emperor of the Dark North Nation was at was even more unknown. In any case, he was the number 1 elite of the Dark North Nation, and it was highly possible that he was also the number 1 elite of the Celestial Sea Planet. Wang Feng and the others actually didn't know much either. They were only in their 30s now, and had been born and grew up in Huju City. Afterwards, they practiced martial arts, and joined the army in order to get by. Afterwards, after a lot of screening, they finally joined the Xianqing banner. There were about 10,000 people in the ordinary army of Huju City, and the most outstanding people would be chosen to join the special teams of Xianqing, Dihuang, Tianhua and Yinmo. Any one member of these teams would be a king tier of 10 Meridians. Their mission was basically to eliminate the demonic beasts within the borders of the nation. This kind of recruitment mission was only done occasionally, and was not much different from a holiday to them. Sun Jianfang soon came out, his face filled with excitement. He called Ling Han over, and seriously advised Ling Han to let go of everything that belonged to the ancient Tao sect. Compared to the greatness of the Dark North Nation, it really wasn't worth mentioning. The old geezer's attitude changed so quickly? Ling Han, on the other hand, didn't care much. He had only entered the ancient Tao sect for a few months, so it was naturally impossible for him to have any sense of belonging. He only thought that Sun Jianfang was worthy of respect, considered Nie Yang a friend and gained a little maid. Previously, he had asked Nie Yang for a favor. When he returned, he would inform Huan Shui that she would come over with the soldier that was heading to the ancient Tao sect. After staying for a few days, the poison in the pool finally dissipated. Ling Han leaped into the pool to see if the volcanic fruit had ripened. The moment he fell into the water, he immediately shivered. It was really cold, almost freezing his blood. He hurriedly channeled the brother monkey cultivation technique. Instantly, a heat circulated in his body, dispelling a portion of the coldness. It was still very cold, but it was finally tolerable. He dived to the bottom of the pool, and the water pressure rapidly increased. Thankfully, the volcanic fruit was growing on the cave wall that was about 30 meters deep in the pool. The water pressure at this position was nothing to Ling Han. It hadn't matured completely yet, and it would probably take another 5 days. Then let's just wait. Ling Han floated to the surface. Voila, water splashed in all directions. He suddenly discovered that even Lian Xuerong was actually at the side of the pool, and this liquid instantly sprayed towards her. Wang, this beauty raised her hand, and instantly, an invisible wall formed around her, blocking the liquid. Apologies, I didn't see Banner Lord, Ling Han said apologetically. Lian Xuerong was not an unreasonable person. She was not angered, but rather threw out a book, and said, "This is a cultivation technique created by His Imperial Majesty, the Xianhuang technique. I will now bestow you with the opportunity to cultivate this technique. If there is anything you do not understand, you can come and find me at any time." Sure enough, proper forces all had cultivation techniques. Otherwise, relying on fist techniques to absorb the mystical power of heaven and earth was really too inefficient. Ling Han accepted the cultivation technique, and Lian Xuerong turned around and left. Sima Rong knelt at the side, so jealous that flames were about to burst from his eyes. He had traveled the world a few years ago, and coincidentally, when he was battling fiercely with a demonic beast, he was rescued by Lian Xuerong's team. He stayed with this team for a period of time, and received some benefits, which allowed him to advance into 10 Meridians. Afterwards he was ordered by Lian Xuerong to return to carry out his mission. However, after so long, he had never been taught any cultivation technique. This damn brat stole everything from him. Sima Rong gritted his teeth. He had been punished to kneel here for a month, but 10 days had not even passed, and he already felt like he could not hold on any longer. If looks could kill, then Ling Han would definitely have been killed by him many times over. Ling Han cast a glance at Sima Rong, but was completely unconcerned. He followed her, and said, "Banner Lord." "What is it?" Lian Xuerong stopped in her tracks, a sliver of coldness in their eyes. If Ling Han pushed his luck and made some unreasonable demands, then she would teach Ling Han a good lesson. "Does Banner Lord possess any information about formations?" Ling Han asked. Chapter 3149 3149 Basics of Formations. Chapter 3149 3149 Basics of Formations. 3149 Basics of Formations. Lian Xuerong was astonished. She hadn't imagined that Ling Han would make such a request of her. "What is it? You still want to study formations?" She turned around and asked. Ling Han nodded earnestly. Lian Xuerong shook her head. "Do you know how many cultivators there are in the Dark North Nation?" "No," Ling Han answered very decisively. "Although there are no exact numbers, there should be no less than 100,000 people of 6 meridians and above," Lian Xuerong said. She paused, then asked, "And in the case of formation masters, how many are there?" "I don't know." Ling Han still shook his head. "Not counting apprentices, there are only a mere 100 people that are truly qualified to be called formation masters." Ling Han understood what Lian Xuerong's words meant. That was, formation masters were extremely rare, and there were extremely high requirements to become one. It was not something that could be achieved just by anyone studying formations. However, what she didn't know was that after absorbing all the essence of the Divine Stone, he was born with outstanding talent in formations and alchemy, and heaven-defying luck and affinity. He merely smiled. "I only want to try and see if I have the talent in this area." Lian Xuerong was slightly displeased. To be so biting off more than one can chew, and be so impractical, how could one possibly walk further on the path of martial arts? "Do you think you are that young Master Wuk, who had fluttering white robes and was renowned throughout the world? Capable of easily cultivating both martial arts and formations." When she thought of that flawlessly perfect man, she couldn't help but blush, her eyes a little dazed. Among all the women in the world, who did not think of him as their dream lover? She hurriedly came back to her senses. She was the banner lord of Xianqing Banner, so how could she lose her composure in front of her subordinates? You wait for a while. Lian Xuerong returned to the battleship, and very soon came out again. She tossed another book to Ling Han. This is a chapter of basics about formations. Take it and comprehend it on your own. Additionally, 3 days later, I will test your grasp of formations. If you can't satisfy me, humph! She waved her hand and left. Ling Han chuckled. All right, then let's take a look at the cultivation technique created by the nation leader of Dark North Nation. He first looked at the Xianhuan technique, and read it word by word. Occasionally, he would let out an O. Very quickly, he closed the book, and closed his eyes to recall. It had to be admitted that this nation leader was really a prodigy of martial arts. The prerequisite of that was that this cultivation technique was really created by him. It couldn't compare to Brother Monkey cultivation technique. However, compared to using the 4 directional fists to cultivate, this was still several times better. As for the details, he would only know after trying it out. Early in the morning of the second day, Ling Han used this cultivation technique to cultivate. He discovered that compared with Brother Monkey cultivation technique, this was only 1/10 of the efficiency. Moreover, there were many impurities in the power refined through this technique, and compared with the power in his body, the difference was clear. And this cultivation technique could be given to the little handmaiden to cultivate. Ling Han nodded, stopped cultivating this cultivation technique, and began using the Brother Monkey cultivation technique again. According to his estimation, without any special help, he would need around 100 days to be able to step into 10 meridians. This wasn't slow at all, but Ling Han hoped that it could be faster, because he wanted to release the Empress and the others as soon as possible. He believed that this was related to his strength. Once he became stronger, the Empress and the others would naturally be able to come out. Half an hour later, Ling Han took out the basics of formations and began to study it. This was really the basics, starting from explaining what formations were. What were formations? Extracting and turning around the power of heaven and earth to confuse, destroy enemies, and refine pills. Thus, formation masters also had a branch called formation alchemists. They specialized in alchemy, and formations was only supplementary to their main specialization. Aside from the most basic formations such as 3 elements formation and the like, the creation of other formation foundations requires learning formation patterns as well as powerful spiritual power as a medium to communicate with heaven and earth. Spiritual power? In the Genesis world, my divine sense is extremely strong, but now, where do I find spiritual power? In other words, if I want to learn formations, I have to first learn how to strengthen my spiritual power, or how to instill spiritual power into formation patterns. I wonder if there is such a cultivation technique in the Dark North Nation. I'll start learning from the most basic formation patterns first. 3,600 basic formation patterns, 1,800 medium-level formation patterns, 108 high-level formation patterns, and 36 extremely effective formation patterns. However, only 744 basic formation patterns are used here. The combination of different formation patterns can have different effects. I wonder what level the formation patterns on the formation foundations dug out in the ancient Tao sect's ancient formation are. I've already had Huan Shui bring it over. I'll study it when the time comes. He began to learn formation patterns, and instantly fell into a state of neglecting food and rest. He even forgot to eat and sleep, and the most important thing of the morning, cultivation. These formation patterns were incredibly complex. They were obviously only basic formation patterns, but their complexity made Ling Han feel as if he was cultivating an incredibly profound martial arts technique. Moreover, there seemed to be a mystical power in the world that was causing trouble. Every time he memorized a formation pattern, it would immediately begin to fade, as if it was about to be erased from his memory. This caused his progress to become incredibly slow. He couldn't even remember them, so how could he talk about creating formation foundations? Ling Han! Ling Han! Ling Han was interrupted by a fierce knock on the door. He was now on the battleship, and had a single room that belonged to him. He came back to his senses, and suddenly felt both hungry and thirsty. "The Banner Lord wants to see you," the person outside said. Ling Han faltered upon hearing this. Could it be that 3 days had already passed? So fast. No wonder he felt so thirsty. He went out to meet Lien Xuerong. "How's the study of the cultivation technique going?" Lien Xuerong asked. "I've learned it." Ling Han nodded. Lien Xuerong was drinking tea, and when she heard this, almost spat it out. What kind of joke was this? He had learnt this cultivation technique in 3 days? Keep bragging. "All right, I'll test you." She began to test Ling Han, but as questions were thrown out and perfectly answered, she couldn't help but reveal a shocked expression. There really were prodigies in the world. For example, the incomparably talented young Master Wuk from the Dark North Nation. It was said that he would be able to learn anything at first glance, and others could only admire him. Was this young man in front of her also such a prodigy? "Go on, work hard on cultivation, and don't neglect it," she said. Because she was too stunned, she had forgotten to ask Ling Han how he was doing in formations, but as she saw it, it was already remarkable for Ling Han to be able to fully comprehend this cultivation technique in 3 days, so how could he possibly have the time to spend on formations? Even if she asked, it would be pointless. 2 days later, Ling Han dived into the pool again and plucked the volcanic fruit. This was already completely mature. A volcanic fruit could instantly turn a 9 Meridians martial artist into a 10 Meridians martial artist. Ling Han couldn't wait. He was filled with longing for 10 Meridians. When he released his power, his battle prowess would instantly advance to a new height. It wasn't impossible for him to battle even a 12 Meridians. He sat down in a cross-legged position and began to gnaw on the volcanic fruit. And it was very fragrant. Though it was not very sweet, it was not too bad, at least. Ling Han made his evaluation, and it was practically in an instant that power surged within his body. Chapter 3150 10 Meridians. Chapter 3150 3150 10 Meridians. 3150 10 Meridians. The volcanic fruit's medicinal effects took effect. Ling Han guided the effects, circulating it within his body. Boom! His 9th meridian was rapidly widening at an extremely intense pace. Logically speaking, this volcanic fruit should have been taken when at the peak stage of 9 meridians. In this way, the powerful medicinal effects could be used to open up the next meridian. Otherwise, because this step was the most difficult, it was very likely that as the medicinal effects took effect, the subsequent effects would no longer be enough to open up the 10th meridian. Ling Han didn't care about this. All he wanted was to break through to the peak stage of 9 meridians. Even if the medicinal effects were exhausted, and he was still unable to break through to 10 meridians, he would only have to wait until the next morning to cultivate again. He would definitely be able to push open the doors to the 10 meridians then. He was filled with confidence about this. His 9th meridian was rapidly expanding. This had long since been opened, but it was still far from widening to the extreme. The medicinal effects were so fierce. Ling Han thought internally. At present, it was as if there was a primitive beast hidden in his body that was endlessly barraging him, making him feel as if his body was about to explode. However, the fiercer the medicinal effects, the faster his cultivation level would increase. Under the repeated impact, his 9th meridian quickly expanded to the extreme, giving rise to a powerful pain. "It's done," he thought to himself, and began to grope around for the 10th meridian. The power in Ling Han's body was identical, but this power was too violent and not gentle, causing Ling Han to be very injured, coughing up blood continuously. Thankfully, not even a minute had passed, and Ling Han had already found the 10th meridian. Boom! His power had a new vent, and immediately surged in, incredibly violently. Come! Come! Ling Han was as steady as a boulder, absorbing this energy and guiding it towards the 10th meridian. Boom! The 10th meridian was forcibly opened up. This was Hand Yang Ming large intestine meridian, and it started from the index finger of the left hand, and finally ended below the left eye. It wasn't enough that it had been opened. The medicinal effects of the volcanic fruit hadn't completely dissipated yet, and after several more attempts, it finally came to an end. Ling Han stood up, filled with anticipation. He was now at 10 meridians, and could release his power. With a thought, power surged in all 10 meridians, converging and fusing, forming some kind of qualitative change that could not be described with words. Ling Han raised his right hand, and pressed it forwards. Pooh! A lamp placed on the table immediately collapsed. Success! Ling Han smiled faintly. However, he didn't dare to use too much strength in the room, so he walked out. There was a combat chamber on the bottom floor of the ship, and there was a strength tester inside. He had long since found out about this. He arrived, only to see 5 men sparring. The youngest was only 20 years old, while the oldest was around 30 years old. They were all 10 meridians. When they saw Ling Han, 2 younger men immediately nodded at Ling Han, and said, "Deputy Captain Ling." The other 3 men were much more arrogant, and acted like they did not see him. Ling Han was suddenly appointed as deputy captain by Lian Xiaorong. This naturally made a great many veteran team members displeased. What right did 9 meridians have to surpass and rule over them? They didn't dare to protest to Lian Xiaorong. However, there was no way they would show Ling Han any respect either. In fact, they were filled with animosity toward him. Ling Han smiled and nodded at the 2 people who had greeted him. As for the other 3, he had no plans to pay them any attention for the moment. He only had to show off his abilities, and what problem would not be dealt with. Seeing that Ling Han did not make any move, and merely walked past them, the 3 soldiers with heavy animosity instantly looked disdainful. Che, he was just a coward. He did not even dare to show a temper in the face of such provocation, so how could he be worthy of being their deputy captain? I really am unconvinced. A mere 9 meridians can actually become our deputy captain. It should be known that the lowest requirement for entering into the Xianqing banner is 10 meridians. What kind of bootlicking has this brat done to the banner lord? Wouldn't you know after challenging him? That's true. If we beat him up, this brat should retreat in the face of difficulties, and ask for his own resignation from the banner lord. Which of our captains didn't obtain their positions with the force of their fists? This guy wants to test his strength? We'll wait for him to finish testing his strength, and then seek him out for a challenge. The 5 of them stopped sparring and walked over. Ling Han arrived in front of the strength tested. He stood 3 feet away from it. Ordinarily, this was the greatest attack range of a 10 meridians king tier. All right, come. He did not channel any kind of technique, and merely shot out a punch. Pun! His fist clearly hadn't landed on the strength testing device, yet the surging power of the punch still surged forward and slammed into it. On the strength tester, the numbers flashed continuously, and finally stopped. Fuck, my eyes must have blurred. How is this possible? Fuck you. On the strength tester, the number 45,500 kilograms was extremely eye-catching. A 10 meridians limit was only 25,000 kilograms of strength, while a 11 meridians limit was also 35,000 kilograms. There were indeed prodigies who could break through this limit, but a 10 meridians highest record was 30,000 kilograms of strength, while an 11 meridians highest record was 40,000 kilograms. 45,500 kilograms of strength. This was almost reaching the limit of 12 meridians. Ling Han must have broken through. Otherwise, he would not have been able to release his power. This was the effect of the volcanic fruit. However, Ling Han should have just broken through, and thus possessed power that was close to the limit of 12 meridians. How could this be believed? Hey, didn't you say you wanted to challenge this new deputy captain? Someone nudged the soldier who had previously said he wanted to challenge Ling Han. The soldier grimaced upon hearing this. How he wished he could dig a hole and bury himself in it. Though he was also at 10 meridians, his power was only 25,000 kilograms. Compared to Ling Han, this gap was close to double. The only result of challenging him would be seeking his own humiliation. It should be known that in front of absolute power, Any kind of technique was completely useless. What a monster. A super monster. To say nothing of becoming a deputy captain, it would not be strange for such a monster to become a captain even. The 5 of them were completely impressed. He was already so strong at 10 meridians, then what about when he advanced to 11 meridians? No. As long as he reached the peak stage of 10 meridians, his power would probably exceed 50,000 kilograms of force. Aside from the distance he could release his force, he would not be inferior to any 12 meridians. Ling Han hesitated for a moment. He discovered that the distance of 3 feet was not the limit of his power. He took a few more steps back, and stood 6 feet away, preparing to throw a punch. What does he want to do? Punch from 6 feet away? A 10 meridians power can reach 10 feet at most, but at this distance, the power is almost 0. It's no different from the force of a breeze. What does our new deputy captain want to do? The 5 warriors were all curious. Right at this moment, Ling Han shot out a punch. Pun! The strength tester instantly started operating again. 4 to 46,000 kilograms. Heavens, what is going on here? Not only has his power not weakened, it has instead strengthened. Without channeling any techniques, power will indeed fluctuate, but when a 10 meridians throws a punch from 6 feet away, his power doesn't decrease at all? Am I dreaming? Freak, without a doubt, this guy is a freak. The 5 warriors all looked at Ling Han with reverence. Was this really a human? Chapter 3151 3151 13 Overlapping Layers of Power. Chapter 3151 3151 13 Overlapping Layers of Power. 3151 13 Overlapping Layers of Power. Ling Han thought for a moment, then took a few steps back. When he was 3 meters away, he then threw another punch. Pung! The strength tester vibrated slightly, and still showed a figure exceeding 45,000 kilograms. On the sidelines, those 5 soldiers were already rendered speechless. Why was it that after one had advanced into 10 meridians, the hierarchy would become extremely clear? It was very simple. A 12 meridians could strike their opponent from a distance of 6 meters away, but a 10 meridians only had an attack range of 3 feet. To say nothing of the fact that there was a power gap in the first place, even if there wasn't, with such a far distance, a 10 meridians wouldn't even have the chance to make a move, and would be directly blasted to the ground. This new deputy captain was definitely not human. In the future, no matter what he said, they had to listen obediently. They definitely could not just obey on the surface but disregard him on the side just because his cultivation level was not high. Ling Han retreated again, and after a few more attempts, he finally found out his limits. When he was about 6 meters away, his power would begin to decline. When he was about 6 meters and 1 foot away, his power would be practically 0. In other words, whether it was in terms of power, or the distance he could release his power, he was not inferior to a 12 meridians. Awesome! Ling Han was brimming with confidence. Right now, even if he had to battle against 12 meridians elites like Meng Runing and the other 12 meridians elites of the older generation, he would be unafraid and there was a 90% chance of winning. He turned around, and saw that the 5 warriors from before were all gaping widely, looking at him as if they had seen a ghost. Ling Han smiled faintly at them before turning around to leave. Fuck, I'm about to go crazy! Such a powerful 10 meridians elite is practically a monster! No, I want to be transferred to Captain Ling's team. I'll apply too. The eyes of these 5 people lit up. If they followed an elite, they would also be able to benefit from it in future, especially when Ling Han was presently in a weak position. If they followed Ling Han, they would be Ling Han's loyal subjects, veteran brothers, and veteran subordinates. Putting them aside, after returning to his own private room, Ling Han began to study compounding overlapping layers of power. The 4 directional fists also had overlapping power, but from the 3 moves that Sun Jianfang had taught him, it could only overlap 2 layers of power, which barely counted. However, among the fist techniques of Brother Monkey Fist Technique, the highest power overlap could reach 180 layers. This was terrifying. With a single punch, it was equivalent to having 180 Ling Han's attack at the same time. How many people could withstand it? Ling Han believed that if he really reached such a profound cultivation level, he would be able to crush a blood transformation tier elite into dust with a single punch. Let's give it a try, and see just how many overlapping layers of power I can reach, Ling Han thought internally. Those 180 overlapping layers of power were only theoretically the maximum value. There was an extremely high requirement for the cultivator himself. The first requirement was comprehension. Ling Han did not lack this, but he also needed his physique to keep up, and his power to keep up. Otherwise, if he shot out a punch of 180 overlapping layers of power, his body would first explode, or his strength would be completely unable to keep up, and he would not be able to hold up after shooting out a few dozen overlapping layers of power. This way. No, it should be this way. And that's not right either. Ling Han very quickly left his private room. He disembarked from the battleship, and found an empty spot to practice in a dense forest. Demonic monkey fists was extremely important, so it was best not to let outsiders know. He practiced over and over again. If he wanted to use overlapping layers of power, he would have to allow the power in his body to quickly be spat out. There was practically no interval, and only then would he be able to unleash more than a single overlapping layer of power with a single strike. The faster the speed at which he spat out power, the more layers there would be overlapping. Ling Han controlled his power and didn't unleash his full power. Otherwise, the power in his body wouldn't be able to withstand such extravagant use. Moreover, if it really came down to a random barrage, this dense forest would also be destroyed by him. At present, the power he could release had reached about 6 meters, and there was absolutely no need for him to draw close at all. The force of over 45,000 kilograms would already be crushing down on his opponent. This was too terrifying. Pun! He had already cultivated to the point of forgetting everything. All of a sudden, a rock exploded, waking him up from the state of practicing fist techniques. I clearly only used 1,500 kilograms of strength in this punch. Logically speaking, it should be impossible for me to shatter a rock. Unless I've cultivated the power of overlap. Ling Han was pleasantly surprised. He carefully recalled the scene just now, then his arms slowly moved. He suddenly threw a punch. Pun! Another rock was shattered by him. As expected, Ling Han broke into a smile. He had grasped the power of overlap. 2 overlapping layers of power. Taking the first step was the most difficult. Next, it would be the problem of overlapping more layers of power, which would completely depend on the rate at which power surged. Ling Han started to practice again. 3 layers, 4 layers, 5 layers, 9 overlapping layers of power. Ling Han soon reached his current limit. 9 overlapping layers of power superimposed, and then his surge of power couldn't keep up any longer. My body doesn't feel any pressure, and my meridians don't feel any pressure either. This means that it is only my power that can't keep up, but my body hasn't reached its limit. Let's try channeling the Brother Monkey cultivation technique again. Ling Han channeled the Brother Monkey cultivation technique, before launching another punch. As expected, the speed at which his power surged had increased considerably. It can still be improved. 10th layer, 11th layer, 12th layer, 13th layer. Ling Han had once again reached his limit, and could not improve any further. Furthermore, Brother Monkey cultivation technique can only be channeled for about a minute. Once I surpass this limit, my meridians will be greatly suppressed, as I will feel as if they're about to explode. Thus, under normal circumstances, the overlap of my power would be 9 layers, and under a burst of explosive power, it would be 13 layers. For example, Wang Feng and the others can only attack with 5 overlapping layers of power. Even if I don't explode, 9 overlapping layers of power will still be enough to suppress them. However, there's no benefit in being too high profile. I'll hide my strength. It's fine as long as I can win. He, who kept a low profile, was actually very proud. Just look, against an elite of 12 meridians, his prerequisite was still winning. I'll ask that Banner Lord Lien if she has any cultivation technique to increase spiritual power. I should start practicing formations. Ling Han went to look for Lien Xuerong again. Have you advanced into 10 Meridians? Lien Xuerong allowed him to enter into her boudoir. Even though this was a battleship, her room was not plain and simple in the slightest. She had everything a woman should have, and even had a dressing table. TSK, this cold-faced woman knew how to dress herself up. Ling Han mocked internally, while replying, yes. If one couldn't advance from the 9 meridians to the 10 meridians after ingesting the volcanic fruit, then one could only say that they were too weak. Lien Xuerong didn't find it strange either. She knocked on the table and said, 5 people applied to be transferred to your team. She paused, and said with a faint smile, what spell did you put them under? She knew that her appointment of Ling Han as deputy captain had actually made many people dissatisfied, especially some veteran soldiers. They had all been in Xianqing Banner for 7 to 8 years, but they were still just ordinary soldiers. A young brat who previously only had 9 meridians was suddenly promoted to deputy captain, so how could they be satisfied? But now, there were actually 5 people who actively wanted to follow Ling Han, and 3 of them were veteran soldiers. This made her feel curious. Ling Han cracked a smile and said, I have always used virtue to convince others. Perhaps, when they saw my noble character, they admired me from the depths of their hearts, and that was why they chose to follow me. Just keep talking nonsense. Lien Xuerong rolled her eyes. Chapter 3152 Divine Intent Disc. Chapter 3152 Divine Intent Disc. 3152 Divine Intent Disc. Lien Xuerong didn't spend much effort on this matter. This matter was insignificant, and she was only curious for a while. What business do you have with me that you seek an audience with me? She asked coldly. Oh. Ling Han nodded. I would like to ask the Banner Lord if there is any cultivation technique that cultivates spiritual power? What do you want this kind of cultivation technique for? Lien Xuerong revealed a curious expression. Isn't this cultivating formations, which requires spiritual power? Ling Han said. You've actually learned it. Ling Xuerong was truly shocked this time. She had initially thought that Ling Han was biting off more than he could chew, and after studying it for a while, he would give up on it. Yet Ling Han actually asked her for the cultivation technique of spiritual power, which also meant that he really wanted to learn formations. Hiss, you freak. She shook her head. There are pitifully few cultivation techniques of spiritual power. They are all grasped in the hands of the formation masters, and would definitely not be taught to outsiders. In other words, unless he became the disciple of these people, it was definitely impossible for him to be taught such a technique. Ling Han couldn't help but feel gloomy. He didn't want to acknowledge anyone as master. Furthermore, there are pitifully few people who can cultivate spiritual power. Lien Xuerong continued. This requires natural talent. If 1 in 10 people can walk on the path of martial arts, then there may not be 1 in 10,000 who can cultivate spiritual power, and only those who have cultivated spiritual power can take the path of formations. She glanced at Ling Han, changed the topic, and said, However, if you really want to give it a try, there's a way. Hold on. She began to rummage through her belongings, searching for something. At first, Ling Han wasn't very concerned, but when he occasionally looked at Lien Xuerong, he suddenly felt heat rise up within him. Fuck, this seductive beauty was actually looking for something with her behind raised. The leather cloth tightly wrapped around that shapely bottom, making one burn with heat. Ling Han hurriedly turned his head, murmuring strange inwardly. What kind of temperament did he have? How could he lose his cool so easily? Could it be that as his cultivation level had been weakened, his self-control had also decreased? After a while, Lien Xuerong finally found what she was looking for. She walked over and threw a disc at Ling Han. It was made of metal, and when it hit the table, a crisp ping sound was heard. This is a tool used by a formation master to select disciples, and is called the Divine Intent Disc. Lien Xuerong explained. Those who have natural talent in this area can use this item to cultivate a shred of spiritual power. Ling Han gave an "oh" and picked up the disc to take a look. It was as thin as a mirror. One side was smooth, and the other side was like a labyrinth, covered with vein patterns. When his eyes focused on it, after a while, he would discover that these vein patterns were actually moving. I would advise you not to bite off more than you can chew. Although being a formation master is extremely rare and has a high status, attaining that requires natural talent, and it is not something that can be achieved just through your hard work, Lian Xiaorong said seriously. I understand. Ling Han nodded. Lian Xiaorong waved her hand dismissively, indicating that Ling Han could leave now. She only had to look at the expression on his face when he answered, and she knew that this guy had not taken her words to heart at all. Forget it. In a few days, when he hit a wall, he would naturally know that martial arts was the only way for him. Just look at the current emperor. His cultivation was exceptional, and his dominance was unmatched in the world. Did he need to cultivate formations as well as a foil for himself? Ling Han brought the disc back with him, and began looking at it. Lian Xiaorong didn't say what to do specifically, but rather simply staring at it would do. Ling Han stared at it. Those dense vein patterns seemed to have a life of their own, and were twisting slightly. Was this a visual side effect caused by staring at it for too long? Ling Han thought internally, but when he channeled the mystical power in his body into his eyes, he still discovered that those vein patterns were moving. No, it's really moving. There should be a small formation set up inside this disc. As he watched, he felt like something in his body had been stimulated, but he could not put his finger on exactly what it was. He shockingly discovered that a small white dot had appeared on the circular disc at some point in time. He stretched out his hand to touch it, yet discovered that it was out of reach. He retracted his hand, and the white dot was still there. This was... An enlightenment came upon Ling Han. Should he use spiritual power to touch it? He tried to push it, but the white dot did not move at all. His determination firmed. Ling Han's interest was piqued. He had a very bad temper, and the more difficult problems he encountered, the more motivated he became. I don't believe that I can't move you. Ling Han tried to use his spiritual power to stimulate this white dot. In the Genesis world, his spiritual power was undoubtedly the number one in the world. Despite now that it had disappeared with the decrease in his own cultivation level, compared to ordinary people, he still knew how to mobilize his spiritual power. However, perhaps he didn't have any spiritual power now, or perhaps his spiritual power was too weak. The white dot didn't move at all. Once Ling Han's temper flared up, he couldn't care about anything else. Aside from eating and drinking, and the fact that he had to cultivate for half an hour every day, he simply held on to this disc, as if it was his lover. He did not just stay in his room. Sometimes he would also sit at the bow of the ship, or at the side of the pool. As time passed, rumors spread. Hey! Do you guys know? The new deputy captain has a crush on the Banner Lord. Isn't that very normal? Our Banner Lord is so beautiful, and her figure is so voluptuous. Who wouldn't like her? This is different. That guy is holding on to the divine intent disc that Banner Lord has given him, and is daydreaming all day. Fuck, such deep yearning to the point of being engraved to the bones. He's treating the divine intent disc as the Banner Lord. Sigh, what a pitiful guy. He actually fell in love with our Banner Lord. He would be destined to be alone for his whole life. All the warriors thought that Ling Han was madly infatuated with Lian Xiaorong, and that was why he had deliberately asked Lian Xiaorong for a token, to look at it and think of her. Wang Feng and the others all ran over to comfort Ling Han. They all patted Ling Han's shoulder, looking at him like he needed to pull himself together. There were plenty of fish in the sea, so why did he have to hang on to this one that had spikes? This would cause himself be pierced through with many bloody holes on his entire body. How could Ling Han be in the mood to pay attention to them? He merely held on to the disc, and was filled with such determination in his heart, and the reason being that he was set on pushing this white dot forwards. Wang Feng and the others all shook their heads. Damn, His guy was already so deeply entrenched in sh*t and could not be pulled out. Sigh, brother, take care of yourself. Several more days passed, and those who had returned to deal with the trivial matters of the sex all returned. With these mighty figures personally dealing with it, the matter of surrendering naturally went very smoothly. Young master! The little female attendant was also brought over. When she saw Ling Han at the bow of the ship, she couldn't help but feel delighted. But what was wrong with young master? He was hugging a strange disc, as if it was some kind of treasure, and was completely ignoring her. Hey, are you this guy's female attendant? Wang Feng asked. That's right. Huan Shui puffed up her chest, appearing very proud. Sigh, better go and persuade your young master. He's about to go crazy, Wang Feng said. What's wrong with young master? Huan Shui couldn't help but become anxious. She grabbed Wang Feng's arm and shook it vigorously. Chapter 3153 Cultivating Spiritual Power. Chapter 3153 Cultivating Spiritual Power. 3153 Cultivating Spiritual Power. Young master is so pitiful! Huan Shui supported her chin with both hands and looked at Ling Han in a daze. Sigh, who would have thought that Brother Ling is such a capricious person, to actually go so crazy for love? Please allow me to sing a song in his honor, a tall, thin man said. He was one of the 10 captains, Fu Xiang. Oh, my love! He began to sing, which also caused those around him to cover their ears. This guy was clearly tone-deaf, yet still had a good opinion of himself. He kept thinking that everyone would not appreciate him, and when he had the chance, he would use his singing voice to brainwash them, so that others would accept the fact that he was the god of songs. What are all of you doing here? Lian Xuerong walked onto the deck, a hint of displeasure on her pretty face. This was too outrageous. They were all warriors after all. Everyone hurriedly dispersed, and even the god of song fled in disarray. Ling Xuerong was even referred to as a cold-faced witch by them in private, so who wasn't afraid? Set off, and return to the Empire, Lian Xuerong said coldly. She glanced at Ling Han, and when she saw that he was still hugging that disc, she couldn't help but shake her head. This guy was really too obsessed, wasn't he? Forget it. When he returned to Huju City, she would give him a good training, then for sure he would not have the time to daydream. The warship shuddered, and had already taken flight. Although the warship was very big, and could accommodate a great many people, Lian Xuerong didn't bring many back with her. Only the younger generation of various sects and factions. Popals such as Higuan and the older generation were left behind in their original forces. She was not interested in them at all. A 10 Meridians in his 70s was really too old. Even if he had cultivated to 12 Meridians, so what? Could he still fight? Mystical power would indeed become denser and denser as one's cultivation level deepened, but physical power was the complete opposite. After 70, it would decline, and after 100, a serious deficiency would appear in physical power. Unless one was like Sun Jianfang, who could actually rely on his own trial and error to step into the blood transformation tier. That was a true prodigy. Higuan and the others were naturally displeased, but what could they do? Could it be that they could force Lian Xuerong? That would really be courting death. The warship headed north. The Dark North Nation was located in the extreme north of the Celestial Sea planet. However, Huju City was located in the southernmost part of the Dark North Nation, and it had only been established for 20+ years. With the warship's speed, the journey would only take about half a month. In truth, the warship's speed was not very fast, but its advantage was that it could ignore all obstacles and travel non-stop day and night. Ling Han was still the same as before. Every day, he would hold on to the disc, and it was as if eating and sleeping had become his instinct. When it was time, he would eat something, and then lay down to sleep, not caring about anything else. Sigh, how deeply in love! Wang Feng sighed ruefully. I want to sing a song again, Fu Xiang said. When they heard this, everyone hurriedly ran away. Young master, young master! Huan Shui was so anxious that she was almost tearing up. The heaven and earth had changed, and large amounts of wild beasts had evolved into demonic beasts. Not only were there demonic beasts on the ground, but there were also demonic beasts in the skies. There were also behemoths with wings that reached dozens of meters in length, or even over 100 meters in length. On their way, they encountered a few. Thankfully, with the light cannons on board, these demonic beasts did not dare to provoke them. 16 days later, a large black city appeared on the ground ahead of them. There were no tall city walls, and this city was open on all sides, with no boundaries. Hiss, how domineering. We're home. Wang Feng and the others all smiled. Their parents, wives, and children were all here. The warship landed somewhere in the city. Boom! The ship shuddered violently. Ling Han suddenly came to his senses. He discovered that the white dot had moved. Was it an illusion? Or a misplaced vision caused by a shock? Ling Han picked up the disc again, and stared at the white dot. He thought to himself, "Move upwards." What surprised him was that this white dot had really moved upwards a little. Success, he had managed to cultivate spiritual power. A smile appeared on Ling Han's face, and he breathed a long sigh of relief inwardly. He felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Without proof, no matter how confident he was, he still felt a little uneasy. Right until this moment, when it was proven that he had really cultivated spiritual power, he naturally became relieved. A strong feeling of weariness assaulted him. Ping! Ling Han fell asleep facing the sky. On the way here, he had only slept for 3 hours a day, and under such accumulation of weariness, he was naturally extremely sleepy. When Ling Han woke up, he discovered that he was already lying on the bed, and this was no longer the warship, but rather a decent bedroom. That's right, he had cultivated spiritual power. Ling Han immediately got up and channeled his spiritual power. In this place, it was also called spiritual power. The moment this spiritual power was being channeled, he realized that it was as if he had an additional pair of eyes, and could actually see what was behind him. No, in all directions, and there was no dead end. This was the effect of spiritual power. It was really too practical. Would anyone still be able to sneak attack him in the future? However, this required him to actively channel spiritual power, and spiritual power was the same as the mystical power in his body. There would come a time when it would be exhausted. If he continued to cultivate and strengthen his spiritual power, he would naturally be able to channel it for a longer period of time. Naturally, Ling Han used spiritual power to observe himself. He wanted to see his meridians. When spiritual power was shifted onto himself, boom, it was as if he had entered into a new world. This was a dimension that had been nurtured from the countless cells in his body. He was like an immortal, and could see all the mountains and rivers on every dimension, every blade of grass and every tree, man and beast. The Empress, Hun Yo, his parents, son, and daughter. A gratified expression appeared on Ling Han's face. He had finally seen his family again. Though they had only been apart for a few months this time, which was far from the time that he had gone into seclusion before, he was still filled with excitement. The flow of time in the two worlds was different. 1 year here was equivalent to 1,000 epochs in the Genesis world. However, with a sweep of his spiritual power, Ling Han felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted from his shoulders. Only 100 or so days had passed in the dimensions inside his body. Was this because he had been born from the divine stone and fused with the world here, so the dimensions in his body had also synchronized in time? That ought to be the case. Ling Han wanted to communicate with the Empress and the others, but discovered that he could only see, as if he was a soul that had no physical body. Though his spiritual power had swept over them repeatedly, the Empress and the others did not react at all. It looked like this was because his spiritual power was too weak. This was equivalent to giving him a calming pill. As long as his spiritual power became slightly stronger, he would be able to communicate with the Empress and the others, and if he was even stronger, he might be able to release them. Good. This was really very good. Young master, you're awake? The little female attendant appeared, her face filled with pleasant surprise. Ling Han got up, and seeing that he was very hungry, he asked, "Is there anything to eat?" "Yes, yes, yes." Huan Shui hurriedly nodded. "Young master, you slept for 3 days and 3 nights. You scared Huan Shui to death." She patted her chest with all her might, as if she wasn't afraid of her chest being flattened at all. He had slept for so long? It looked like he had overdrawn his body greatly. Ling Han got off the bed. The living room was right outside the bedroom. It was a very small area. Huan Shui brought over dishes and rice, and Ling Han began to eat. After filling his stomach, Ling Han asked, "Where's my disc?" "Ah, I don't know," Huan Shui said, her gaze flickering. "And?" Ling Han's expression became serious. "Young master." Huan Shui was instantly scared pale, and she said, "Just forget about the Banner Lord Lien. Big Brother Wang and the others already said that Banner Lord Lien definitely won't fall in love with anyone. You're just digging your own grave and hurting yourself." What was going on here? You're tuning into the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.